The Mute at Hogwarts. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 1: The Mute Wizard. Wingardium Leviosa. Professor Flitwick held his wand, and with a flick of his wrist, the spell synced with the feathers in front of him. The feathers suddenly floated up and landed above the table. Now, don't forget that subtle wrist movement we've been practicing, Professor Flitwick said sharply, standing on his pile of books as usual. Wave and shake. Remember, wave and shake. And pronounce the spell correctly, too, or you'll have other problems. Everyone, split into pairs and start practicing. Professor Flitwick divided the wizards into groups. Harry's partner was Seamus Finnegan, and Ron's was with Hermione Granger. Finally, only one student with black hair and dark eyes remained without a partner. John, wait a moment. I'll teach you the secrets of silent casting, Flitwick said to Jean, then went to supervise the other students. Jean simply nodded, watching the others practice with interest. His gaze lingered most on Harry, Ron, and Hermione. After all, they were the protagonists of the story. That's right, he wasn't from this world. By chance, he'd been transported to this one and received an acceptance letter from Hogwarts School. This should have been a joyous occasion. He could learn magic and experience the vibrant world of wizarding life. But there was just one problem. He was aphasic, or, more commonly, mute. As everyone knows, magic requires the spoken word and the use of a wand. Only after advanced to a certain level of magical training, mastering the art of silent spellcasting, could the incantation step be dispensed with. Clearly, for a 12-year-old new to the magical world, the art of silent spellcasting was far too complex. Especially since he'd made the leap to silent spellcasting in one go, it was like asking a child who couldn't even walk to ride a bicycle. But Guan Qiong followed suit, waving his wand and trying his best to follow through. After all, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to learn magic. If he gave up simply because of a few obstacles, he'd be doing a disservice to the deity who had sent him to this world. As for restoring wizarding glory and defeating the impending Voldemort, that was left to the protagonists. Rather than interfering with something already destined, he preferred to explore the world's other sides. What about a dragon as a mount? How could a descendant of the dragon never ride a dragon? Originally, he wasn't supposed to be admitted. After all, the difference between a squib and a mute is only a single letter, and as an aphasic, he most likely wouldn't be able to move beyond normal spellcasting, wasting years at Hogwarts. Ultimately, he'd learn a great deal of knowledge he couldn't utilize, becoming a new squib in the wizarding world. And a magical one at that. But Dumbledore overruled everyone, stating that his magical talent was incredibly high, surpassing even Dumbledore's own, rivaling the four founders of Hogwarts. Therefore, he was able to attend Hogwarts as an aphasic, a first in the Academy's history. Guan Qiong waved her wand as she observed the protagonist's movements. Harry and Ron chanted spells loudly, waving their long arms like windmills, but the feathers before them remained motionless. From Guan Qiong's perspective, besides their natural appearance, something indescribable and indescribable appeared with their movements, then vanished into thin air. Guan Qiong knew it was magic. With his knowledge as a first year at Hogwarts, combined with the foundation of his past life, he understood magic to be roughly divided into three parts: wand movement, spell, and magical output. The wand movement and spell are like the positive and negative poles of a circuit, while the magical output is like the current in the circuit. When they form a complete circuit, the magic, the light bulb, is activated. However, this isn't as easy as building a circuit. Every spell has a unique circuit. The levitation spell's circuit is like having someone draw a semicircle with their left hand, the wand movement, and a semisquare with their right hand, the spell, starting at the same point and connecting at the same point. And at the moment of connection, the magic flowed through the circuit. The magic output couldn't be too high, otherwise the excessive impact would cause the magic circuits to shift, causing the spell to fail. Of course, first-year wizards didn't have to worry about this. Their magic power was very limited, and some could only penetrate the magic circuits once or twice. As for Guan Qiong, he truly lived up to Dumbledore's claim of exceptional talent. His current total magic power was 10 times that of the other students, and he could sense that it was increasing as his body grew. Unfortunately, he was a phasic, making learning magic more than 10 times more difficult than for others. Over there, Hermione, partnering with Ron, had successfully made the feather float and settle above their heads. "Well done," Professor Flitwick praised her without hesitation. "Excellent. Look everyone, Miss Granger has succeeded." Hermione's nose lifted high, enjoying the attention. But Ron, across from her, had a grim expression, like a pair of mustard-smelling beans. Guan Qiong also looked over. From his unique perspective, Hermione had just completed a complete magical circuit. Although the wiring was a little choppy, the interface was barely connected, and the magic power was only a hair's breadth, barely connecting the positive and negative poles. For a first year, a girl only 12 years old, she was undoubtedly excellent. Guan Qiong was also very happy, because he had memorized Hermione's circuit. When he couldn't experience the magical circuit himself, he could only learn by observing others. "Okay, June, stop looking at others and let's begin teaching." Professor Flitwick stood over Guan Qiong's desk. He watched Guan Qiong turn his gaze away from Hermione and sighed. "What a pity. If you weren't a phasic, June, you would be even better than Miss Granger." Guan Qiong said nothing. There was nothing he could do. However, although he didn't have high hopes for Guan Qiong's learning, Professor Flitwick still tried his best to teach him the technique of silently casting the levitation charm. "The key is to keep thinking about it in your mind, child. You need strong concentration and willpower. Try your best to imagine what the spell will look like when it is cast. Child, you can do it." Professor Flitwick said so, but Guan Qiong looked helpless. Fortunately, Professor Flitwick demonstrated several silent levitation spells during the teaching process, allowing Guan Qiong to observe the magic circuit that was different from Hermione's before. Updated every morning at 8 o'clock. Chapter 2: Multiple Uses of the Luminescent Spell. The class ended quickly. Guan Qiong didn't dwell on the emotional entanglements of the three protagonists, but went straight to the 8th floor of the castle. The Room of Requirement. He didn't remember much about the original novel, but he did know this important location. "I need a room to practice magic. I need a room to practice magic. I need a room to practice magic." He silently recited the place he wanted and walked past that section of wall 3 times before a smooth door appeared in the wall. Pushing it open, he entered a room spanning 300 square meters. Inside, there were scarecrows that served as fixed targets and a machine that launched frisbees. The walls were made of an extremely magic-resistant metal, minimizing damage to the room. But Guan Qiong had no use for any of these. At least, not yet, as he was still just a first-year wizard. Guan Qiong stood in the middle of the room, recalling the 2 patterns he had memorized today. One was the magic circuit used by Hermione when she used the levitation charm. It was simple and clear, and in Guan Qiong's mind, it looked like a combination of a semicircle and a semi-square. One was the magic circuitry used by Professor Flitwick during silent spellcasting. The one circuitry remained normal, but the spell itself. Guan Qiong recalled the pattern she had seen then, a simple semicircle with a curious arc and a swirling dot at the center, resembling a pair of bird wings. Silent spellcasting involves controlling the flow of magic power through this circuitry during spellcasting, connecting it to the circuitry of wand movement. If normal spellcasting involved wand movement and spellcasting like digging a trench in the ground, then as long as the circuitry was correct, simply injecting magic power into the system without thinking. Silent spellcasting, however, involved no trenching, rather, it involved direct control of the magic power during casting, forming this circuitry and connecting it to the wand movement circuitry. This was quite challenging. But as Dumbledore had said, Guan Qiong's talent was truly exceptional. Not only could he see the flow of magic power, but his memory of the circuitry and control of magic power were far superior to those of ordinary people. Looking at the feather before him, he waved his right hand, concentrating on controlling his magic power. It split into 2 parts. One part flowed out along the circuit formed by his wand movement, while the other, under his control, formed the pattern and attempted to connect with the wand circuit. The first attempt failed, the feather didn't move at all. Undeterred, he continued his second attempt. The second attempt also failed, but the feather did show some faint movement. Guan Qiong stared at the feather, recalling his previous misstep. While multitasking, his focus on the pattern had caused his right wand movement to become distorted, preventing the circuit from connecting. The third attempt, Guan Qiong's movements were slower than before, and a faint silver glint seemed to linger in his eyes. His magic power felt like a graspable paintbrush, and he controlled it, painting the pattern in his mind, bit by bit. Without a single mistake, the feather trembled gently, finally floating up and landing in front of Guan Qiong. Success! Guan Qiong cheered inwardly, smiling with satisfaction. His talent was truly formidable. Guan Qiong paused his magical output, and the feather gently drifted down. The levitation charm was indeed a very basic spell, and the circuits for wandless casting didn't vary much. He had seen Professor McGonagall perform the transfiguration charm once before, in Professor McGonagall's transfiguration class. The dazzling pattern nearly overloaded Guan Qiong's brain, causing him to faint. Compared to the levitation charm, it was like the difference between 1 + 1 = 2 in calculus. Even the transfiguration charm circuits taught in regular classes were significantly more complex than the levitation charm, resembling the combination of several basic shapes. This had led to his current slow progress in transfiguration. Of course, the other students were similar, only Hermione had already managed to transform a piece of wood into a needle, with only one pointed end. After using the levitation charm again to make the feather fly, Guan Qiong stopped practicing the levitation charm and turned to other magic. The illumination charm, the spell was luminous. This spell was even more basic than the levitation charm, emitting a light source from the wand. From Guan Qiong's perspective, the magic circuit of this spell was even simpler, a straight horizontal line. Furthermore, as the line lengthened, the magic power required increased, and its brightness also increased. As Guan Qiong channeled magic power into his wand, a bright light rose from it, illuminating his dark eyes like a star. But Guan Qiong didn't stop. His expression was solemn, his focus even more intense than when he had just practiced the levitation spell. The magic circuit of the illumination spell was clearly visible to him, a straight line. His magic power was channeled into that line, maintaining the bright spot's glow. He immediately began to control his magic power, slowing down the supply and attempting to shorten the circuit. The bright spot before him began to dim, becoming significantly smaller overall. But it didn't collapse. Only when the light-like spot had dwindled to the size of a firefly did Guan Qiong breathe a sigh of relief. The magic circuit was no longer a straight line, but a tiny dot. And the dot's length was less than 1/20th of the straight line's length. Guan Qiong's eyes shone with joy. After this period of practice, he had finally mastered the art of illumination. From its initial collapse, to its weakening and near collapse, he could now completely fix it into a small fluorescent dot. But this wasn't the end of the story. He began to multitask, maintaining the initial fluorescent dot while simultaneously creating another with his wand. Thanks to the previous circuitry, creating the second one was much easier, and the speed of converting a bright dot into a fluorescent dot increased by more than half. He maintained the supply of mana to the completed fluorescent dot while continuously creating new ones. Finally, when Guan Qiong's mana had dwindled to half, a star-like display of light appeared before him. His mind was also strained to its limit. Fatigue began to show in his eyes, and his right hand trembled constantly. Controlling magic power required concentration, and simultaneously controlling the output of hundreds of fluorescent dots strained his energy. But he didn't stop, and began to manipulate the dots into motion. Some began to dim, disappearing into the air like dead fireflies, but Guan Qiong paid no attention, his complete focus focused on controlling their positions. One by one, the dots of light began to connect, transforming into bands of light. At the same time, their positions changed, forming different patterns. Finally, Guan Qiong slowly moved several of the patterns to the center, forming a simple phrase, "Hello World." Chapter 3 Hermione. As the words formed, Guan Qiong's mind finally reached its limit. He slowly exhaled the breath he had been holding in his chest, his mind and magic no longer connected to the illumination spell. The points of light before him, having lost his control, lingered for a mere moment before dissipating and extinguishing one by one. But it didn't matter, as long as they had existed, that was enough. A smile shone in Guan Qiong's eyes. As a mute, communicating with others was extremely inconvenient. He certainly carried a notebook with him, but it wasn't magical at all. Now, he could just use his wand to produce words. It was quick and concise. And, it looked cool. At least, that's what Guan Qiong thought. He also had another consideration, combining his memories of the East with his understanding of magic in this life. Perhaps the talismans he had heard of in his previous life could be understood as another system of magic. The talismans replaced the once motion circuits, while the chanted incantation, combined with the output of power, generated a special power there. Perhaps the truth was completely different, but it was still a promising avenue. Although he was aphasic, if the language created by the illumination charm could function as a spell circuit, combined with the one motion circuit, he could cast magic like a normal person. Of course, failure was possible, as he had previously attempted to do by mimicking Eastern hand gestures to replace spells and create a magic circuit. This attempt failed because he couldn't understand the relationship between the gestures and the generated circuit. But failure wasn't a big loss, it would only deepen his understanding of the magic circuits. Moreover, even if the talisman attempt failed, he still had a byproduct, the ability to communicate seamlessly. After arriving in this world, especially after discovering he was aphasic, he felt deeply sad for a while, convinced that his life would be a failure, just like his previous one. But the appearance of that notice opened a new light in his world. Magic was such a fascinating thing in the world, and the key was that he could learn and master it. So what if he was aphasic? He had still mastered the silent casting of the levitation charm and the illumination charm. What if learning was 10 times more difficult than others? He would work 10 times harder to catch up. Furthermore, he possessed a talent no one else could match. His total magical power alone was 10 times greater, fueling his relentless practice of magic. As long as he persevered, even if he couldn't ultimately become a great wizard like Dumbledore, he could at least live a good life in this world. He could see the sights of the wizarding world and enjoy a life he never knew in his previous life. As for Voldemort and Harry Potter, Guan Qiong's current approach was to not interfere with each other. The storyline was already well developed, and if he meddled too much, who knew what would happen? Ultimately, the evil Voldemort would die, and the boy who lived would triumph. At worst, he could retreat for the last 2 years and return after this incident was over. With a resolute purpose and a clear mind, Guan Qiong opened the door to the room of requirement and stepped out. Today was Halloween. Although he didn't feel much for festivals here, it was still a festive occasion. At least the restaurant had a much wider variety of food than usual. Then he saw Hermione sitting next to him, her head buried in her hands. Guan Qiong scratched his head. They might say they didn't bother each other, but they were still classmates in the same house, so they usually maintained a normal schoolmate relationship. Compared to his superficial relationship with Harry and Ron, he and Hermione were much closer, practically a friend. At the beginning of the school year, upon hearing that there was a mute student in the house, Hermione approached him, saying that if he needed any help or had any questions about his studies, he could come to her. It couldn't be helped, she was just so warm and kind-hearted, and incredibly proactive. On the train to the start of the semester, she even dragged Neville from car to car, asking if he had seen his pet toad. Even Guan Qiong, with her adult soul, couldn't pull off such a move. Unless it was a kilogram of gold that was missing, not a toad. Later, when they arrived at the house, they often ran into each other in the library. Hermione praised Guan Qiong's eagerness to learn, feeling the joy of finding a kindred spirit. They soon became friends. On the surface, it was Hermione who took the initiative and warmly cared for Guan Qiong, her gifted but mute classmate. Guan Qiong also tried to maintain her relationship with Hermione. After all, as a mute, he needed to learn spells by observing others cast. Of course, part of the reason was because Hermione was truly adorable. Who doesn't love a cute little girl? Guan Qiong patted Hermione's shoulder, waking her up. In the original novel, Hermione was supposed to hide in the girls' bathroom, crying, and then be rescued by Harry and Ron during the troll attack at night, thus officially forming the Gryffindor Adventure and Points Deduction team. But perhaps because of Guan Qiong, Hermione thought of Guan Qiong when Ron told her she had no friends. Unfortunately, she followed Guan Qiong to the 8th floor, but was a step too slow and didn't see Guan Qiong. She cried herself to sleep. Hermione looked up, her brown eyes still red, clearly from crying. Seeing Guan Qiong, Hermione recalled the previous events and the reason for her presence. She quickly stood up, her back to Guan Qiong, rubbing her eyes with both hands and rubbing her face like a kitten, trying to wake herself up. When she felt everything was normal, she turned around and looked at Guan Qiong. "Qiong, why are you here?" Hermione asked. She actually wanted to ask where Guan Qiong had been and why she hadn't seen him when she came up. But she was afraid Guan Qiong would ask why she followed him and why she fell asleep here. She couldn't bring herself to tell someone she'd been upset with. "I was just practicing magic over there," Guan Qiong waved his right hand, and a string of silver words appeared on his wand. After successfully casting it once before, he became much more proficient the next time. Hermione's eyes reflected a little silver light, and she stared in wonder at Guan Qiong's wand and the gradually fading words. What is this? What kind of magic is this? How come I've never seen it before? Hermione's attention was immediately drawn to the magic. The illumination charm. I modified it so it can speak for me, Guan Qiong smiled. As Hermione watched, he briefly demonstrated a process of the illumination charm's points of light dwindling from large to small and then aligning together. Oh my goodness, June, that's amazing. I can only control one luminous charm at best, but you can control so many, Hermione said. That's nothing, Guan Qiong said modestly, glancing at the dark sky outside the castle. The Halloween party's about to begin. Let's go to the dining room, okay? Hermione looked a little hesitant, but ultimately nodded. They walked downstairs together. Halfway down, Hermione suddenly spoke. June, are we friends? Her voice was low, lacking her usual confidence. Guan Qiong turned away, and Hermione tilted her head to the left. Guan Qiong couldn't see her face, only her thick brown hair and chubby profile. This little girl. Guan Qiong smiled inwardly, waving his wand in his right hand. A word shimmered in silver light and floated in front of Hermione. Of course, Guan Qiong's talents, source of magic, magical perspective, handy, similar to Tesla valve. In addition, this book swaps the cutting spell and standard spells, elementary with the illuminating spell and standard spells, intermediate. Chapter 4 Halloween Party. As they descended to the second floor, they encountered Malfoy and his two lackeys, Goyle and Crabbe, who were also coming down. Malfoy first spotted Hermione, his expression shifting. He was about to approach and say something, but when he saw Gwen standing next to Hermione, he retreated in disappointment. Gwen looked at Malfoy, who had already come down, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Perhaps due to his aphasia, his other senses were more potent than those of an average person. His eyes could transform into magical vision, and his ears, while not as special, were still more sensitive than average. Even before Malfoy saw them, he heard Malfoy's voice. A trace of narcissus root powder, wormwood, a trace of croton powder. Then there was a sinister laugh. Then, Malfoy spotted Hermione and stopped talking to his lackeys. This guy is so annoying. He's nothing like the aristocrats I read about in books, Hermione said, wrinkling her nose as Malfoy retreated. And he's always playing with Harry, Gwen smiled. No, it's Harry. I really don't understand why he keeps targeting him, Hermione couldn't understand. Coming to school, he didn't study hard, constantly causing trouble for others. Was he still a student? Perhaps this was the bond between them, Guan Qiong muttered inwardly. As they spoke, they arrived at the first-floor auditorium. The auditorium had been decorated to reflect the holiday. The candles that usually floated in the sky were replaced by pumpkin lanterns, and swarms of bats circled overhead, yet the atmosphere wasn't frightening, but rather mysterious. Piles of dark clouds hovered in the sky, with a vast, bright moon in the center, casting its silver light onto the clouds below, the bats, and the dining table, casting a veil of silver. Guan Qiong watched all this unfold. Whether from a normal or magical perspective, everything seemed mysterious and beautiful. Harry then pulled Ron to his feet, blocking the way between Guan Qiong and Hermione. Hermione, Ron wants to apologize for what happened today, Harry said, making his intentions clear. Guan Qiong raised an eyebrow, not expecting things to turn out this way. However, he didn't take the childish argument too seriously. Hermione turned her head away, but she didn't walk around them. Ron followed suit, his chin stubbornly raised. Like two children throwing a tantrum, neither spoke first. Ron, Harry tugged on Ron's hand, warning him. Ron remembered Hermione's tears today, and the damn taunts from Fred and George back in the common room. Especially how they kept circling him, mumbling, "What did I just hear? Ron made me cry, and a girl, so irresponsible, how about we tell Mom?" Ron felt he was wrong, and Fred and George's promise to tell Mom made him furious, and he started yelling. "I'll apologize to her, tonight at the banquet." Meanwhile, the Weasley twins sat in their seats, 4 eyes fixed on Ron, expectant. "I'm sorry," Harry prompted Ron to whisper, barely a mosquito's buzz, barely registering a ripple in the clamor of the banquet hall. Hermione's expression shifted, but she didn't turn around. After all, such a small voice lacked sincerity. "Ron, "Speak louder. You can do this," Harry encouraged him. Time seemed to pass for an eternity, yet it also seemed like only a moment. Ron clenched his fists and muttered, "I'm sorry." His voice was a little muffled, but a little higher than before, so at least all four of them heard it. Hermione's expression softened. She turned to look at Harry, then at Gwen, then picked up the glass of lemonade in front of Harry, snorted at Ron, and turned to sit next to Parvati Patil, a classmate. Though she didn't say anything, her actions showed she accepted the apology. Besides, she had friends, Gwen was one of them, so Ron's words were bullshit, and there was no need for her to get angry. "Ron, you did it," Harry said happily, hugging Ron's shoulders. "Yeah, you did it, Ron." The Weasley brothers clapped beside them, speaking in unison. "I don't want to be your little brother," Ron muttered, but his mood brightened, a smile on his face. The apology wasn't humiliating, nor did it make him feel humbled. Instead, it felt like a victory. With this thought, the frustration and unhappiness on his face quickly vanished, and he immersed himself again in the Halloween feast. He felt a little hungry, and looking at the bacon in front of Harry, he stretched out his fork. "Harry, do you want this bacon?" "No, I'm trying something else today," Harry said, picking up a jacketed potato. Guan Qiong, sitting next to Harry, watched the scene and sensed something was wrong, but the festive atmosphere of the party had infected him, so he didn't bother to dwell on it. After all, there was no chance of a major problem happening inside Hogwarts. At most, it would just be a troll breaking in. With this thought, Guan Qiong quickened his pace. Just like the English word abandon is always the one he knows the most, Guan Qiong had the deepest impression of the entire Harry Potter story, knowing every detail by heart. By the third book, he only remembered the broad outlines. As for the rest, he only had fragments, like the burning of the Room of Requirement, Dumbledore's death, and the final battle between Harry and Voldemort, in which Harry won. He couldn't remember much more, even though he had read the entire Harry Potter series. So, he knew that a troll would attack soon, and the students would rush to safety, leaving their food behind. Thinking of this, Guan Qiong glanced at Hermione, who frowned and was talking to Parvati beside her. While the plot had changed slightly, it wasn't a big deal. The trio had reconciled after all, hadn't they? Given their naturally adventurous nature, the rest of the story wouldn't change much. At that moment, Ron, who was sitting next to Guan Qiong, yawned, as if he was feeling sleepy after a satisfying meal. This is normal. Children his age need adequate sleep to grow taller. Look at Harry, he's out every night. But something just doesn't feel right. Guan Qiong feels like she's overlooked something, but there's no time to dwell on it. Professor Quirrell bursts into the Great Hall, a look of terror on his face, as if a three-headed hellhound is chasing him. His large scarf tilted askew, he approaches Dumbledore's chair, gasping for air. "The troll, in the dungeons, thought you should know." Then, he collapses to the floor, unconscious. Chapter 5 Only he. The Great Hall had been quiet since Quirrell's entrance, so Quirrell's words reached everyone without reservation. The students began to stir, their faces etched with fear. Screams rose and fell, shaking the dark clouds in the sky apart. Bats began to flee, and the moon itself vanished into the clouds. The professors at the long table above exchanged glances. Dumbledore used his wand to blast purple fireworks, urging the students to quiet down. Then, in a low voice, he spoke. "Prefects, take the students from each house to their dormitories." The prefects of the 4 houses obeyed and began to lead their students out of the Great Hall. The prefect for Gryffindor was Percy Weasley, another Weasley. He stood up and shouted, "Don't move. Follow me. Don't be afraid, first years. The professors will take care of the troll. As long as you stay still, nothing will happen." Percy pushed through the crowd, his signature red hair like a flame, leading the students towards Gryffindor. Guan Qiong was among them. He had just stood up and was about to leave when Harry, who was beside him, called out to him. "Hey, Qiong, help. Ron's sound asleep. We need to carry him to the dormitories." Ron slumped heavily on Harry's shoulder, as if unconscious. Guan Qiong reached out to help from the other side, but in a flash, he suddenly remembered something he had been ignoring. Ron's sound asleep, bacon, narcissus root powder, wormwood, Malfoy. Guan Qiong turned to look at Hermione's position, but she wasn't there. Only Parvati and Lavender were following the group to the common room. Guan Qiong was startled, and a sense of foreboding emerged in his heart. Ignoring Harry and Ron, Guan Qiong pushed through the crowd and came to Parvati's side. "Where's Hermione?" Words appeared on the wand, imprinted in front of Parvati's eyes, bright and huge. Parvati looked at the anxious Guan Qiong, confused as to what had happened. She replied, "Hermione seems to have had a stomach ache and just went to the girls' bathroom." Her expression changed as she spoke, and she murmured, "Hermione doesn't know the troll has entered the school yet." As expected, Guan Qiong understood. Hermione had a stomachache, lemon juice, croton powder, Malfoy. The source of everything was Malfoy. He must have figured out Harry's eating habits and wanted to embarrass him today. But now wasn't the time to think about Malfoy, the priority was saving Hermione. Guan Qiong looked up. The professors on the podium had disappeared, probably off to look for the troll or to the fourth floor to protect the Philosopher's Stone. Meanwhile, Harry and Ron. Guan Qiong looked over. The Weasley twins had already carried their younger brother and were following the group, with Harry trailing beside them. Clearly, they didn't know Hermione was trapped in the bathroom. This meant he was the only one left. The troll might be scary, but if Harry and Ron, two young wizards, could handle it, there was no reason he couldn't. Guan Qiong pushed his way through the crowd and ran towards the second floor. Behind him, Parvati watched anxiously, unsure of what to do. He squeezed past the Hufflepuff crowd and turned, arriving in an empty side corridor. The students' noise was muffled by the thick castle walls, leaving only faint whispers. Silence fell. Guan Qiong could smell a sickening odor in the air. He swore he had never smelled such a foul odor in any of his lifetimes. It was like. The more he thought about it, the more nauseous he became. He regretted not eating enough at the banquet. Fighting back his nausea, he continued towards the odor. As he drew closer to the troll, the stench grew stronger. He began to hear the troll's voices, low grunts and the dragging of giant feet. But suddenly, the noise seemed to fade. Guan Qiong, startled, realized the reason. Sure enough, the next second, a massive scream rose, drowning out the troll's voices and echoing throughout the corridor. The voice was shrill and terrifying, and it was unmistakably a girl's. "Hermione." Guan Qiong sped up, rushed to the women's bathroom door, and flung it open. Hermione huddled against the innermost wall, her mouth gaping, her eyes terrified, as if she were about to faint. In front of her stood a gigantic, hideous creature. A troll. 12 feet, 3.6 meters, tall, it was more than twice Guan Qiong's height, 1.52 meters, and over 5 times her width. Its gray skin was scraggly, giving the troll the appearance of being carved from granite. And only roughly chiseled, not polished. Contrasting that massive body was its tiny, cocoa bean-like head, revealing a low IQ. Although prepared, Guan Qiong's heart still skipped a beat at the sight of the troll, taller and thicker than Yao Ming. He had never seen anything like it in his past and present lives. And it stinks. As they reach behind the troll, the nauseating smell intensifies, nearly making Guan Qiong vomit his entire dinner. Guan Qiong, Hermione, now spotting Guan Qiong, shouts excitedly. But that cry also draws the troll's attention. It twists its clumsy body, blinking, and looks back with its ugly little eyes. Then it spots Guan Qiong, one hand covering its nose, the other poised to wave its wand. Guan Qiong glances at Hermione helplessly. He's just about to make a surprise attack to save her. Hermione, realizing what's going on, reaches out to cover her mouth, but it's no use. The troll, already drawn to Guan Qiong, advances on him, carrying a wooden stick twice his own size. There's no other choice but to fight head-on. Guan Qiong thinks to herself, dissolving the nearly completed magic circuit and replacing it with a more familiar one. Illumination spell. Lumis. 2 tiny points of light flew out of Guan Qiong's wand, like fireflies, and flew towards the troll's face. The troll made a low, puzzled sound, looked at the 2 tiny fireflies, stretched out his huge, calloused hands, and grabbed the fireflies. Guan Qiong controlled the light points to pass through the gaps between the troll's fingers, and flew all the way to the troll's 2 eyes. The troll stared at the 2 fireflies, confusion appearing on his face. The little head like a cocoa bean attracted its attention directly, and it temporarily forgot about Guan Qiong and Hermione. Guan Qiong watched this scene, waved his wand vigorously, and magic power instantly poured into the 2 thin magic circuits. At the same time, he controlled the magic circuits to make them infinitely stretching to the limit that Guan Qiong could control. Fluorescent flashes. Max. Chapter 6, Don't treat the illumination spell as a flash bomb. The firefly's light rapidly grew, like a suicide bomb. In a split second, it transformed from a tiny pinprick into vast, sun-like radiance, too bright to be looked at directly. The troll let out a horrific cry and covered his eyes with his hands. Staring at Guan Qiong's flashbang so closely, even if it didn't carry much heat, it was enough to burn his eyes, causing intense pain. Guan Qiong quickly cast a levitation spell on the tree-thick wooden stick in the troll's hand. Wingardium Leviosa. The stick swung slowly, trying to escape the troll's grasp and float upward. But the next moment, the troll roared, grasped the stick tightly, and swung it outward. The intense pain in his eyes and the shock to his brain drove him mad, and he swung the stick wildly, smashing everything around him. The soundproof door, the wall decorations, the sink, and the wall mirror were all toppled by the troll, leaving the entire bathroom in a shambles. Hermione screamed again. Guan Qiong's flashbang had accidentally hit her, leaving her blind. When her vision returned, she saw the troll madly waving its club, advancing towards her. Her luck was truly bad. With a choice between two options, the troll closed its eyes and chose to move inward. Panicked, she raised her wand and tried to cast a spell at the troll, but her mind raced through all the spells she'd learned, and she didn't know which one to use. Guan Qiong frowned. Her experience from books was no longer effective. The troll gripped the club tightly, and the levitation charm was no match for the troll's strength. Looking at the terrified Hermione, Guan Qiong's eyes hardened, and he gritted his teeth as he aimed his wand at the troll. He flicked his right wand, forming a semi-square circuit of magic power. He simultaneously controlled the magic power to flow outward, forming a circuit like a bird's wings. The two circuits connected, and the levitation charm was activated. Target, the troll. The troll paused, but the next moment, it continued forward. From Guan Qiong's perspective, the troll also possessed a green magic circuit, simple in structure but incredibly robust. To use magic on a living being, one must breach its inherent life circuit. All of Guan Qiong's magic surged forth, filling the levitation spell's magical circuit. Tiny protrusions, like fine feathers, began to appear on the bird-shaped circuit. Guan Qiong gritted his teeth, a faint silvery glow like moonlight in his eyes. He aimed his wand at the troll. Fly, the levitation spell fell upon the troll, covering its inherent green circuit. Then, from Guan Qiong's perspective, its massive wings spread out. Then, flapping vigorously, the troll's body began to slowly float upwards. Feeling uneasy, it roared and began to twist its massive body, trying to break free. But in mid-air, it had no leverage and could only struggle like a fish. Guan Qiong grasped his wand with both hands and pulled back with all his might like a fishing rod. The troll's body floated higher and higher, until its cocoa bean-sized head touched the bathroom ceiling. Then, Guan Qiong cast a levitation spell, spinning the troll's body in the air until its head was facing the ground. He instantly released a magic circuit. The troll fell from the air with a deafening explosion. The weight of its massive body and the force of the solid floor clamped its pitiful head between them, like a walnut. Fortunately, there was no gore, the troll merely fainted. Its head not splitting like a watermelon. As for whether the inside of its head had turned to tofu, Guan Qiong had no idea. His magic power was nearly exhausted, his spirit at its limit, and he could only hold on to the wall to prevent himself from falling. Facing a troll head-on was too much for a 12-year-old wizard. But fortunately, he succeeded. After a while, Hermione recovered from her shock and carefully stepped past a troll to reach Gwen. Is it dead? Gwen waved his wand, but no light appeared. He was too exhausted to speak. Then, loud footsteps sounded from outside, and a moment later, Professor McGonagall rushed into the bathroom. Oh, my God, did you do this, June? She looked at the fallen troll, then at Gwen and Hermione, who looked frail. Next to her was Parvati. She finally found Professor McGonagall and told her that Hermione and Gwen might be in danger. Gwen nodded, and Hermione said loudly, "Yes, Professor, Gwen just defeated the troll and saved my life." Professor McGonagall was about to speak when another sound of footsteps sounded, and Snape and Quirrell also entered the bathroom. Quirrell looked at the fallen troll, clutched his heart and screamed, then slumped against the wall, his body trembling. It looked like a relapse of a heart attack. Guan Qiong looked at Quirrell, whose face was pale. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether she was weaker or he was weaker. After all, he looked like he was about to die. Professor Snape bent down to check on the troll and shook his head slightly. He was still angry when he first came in, but when he saw that it was Guan Qiong, his expression quickly returned to calm. It's hopeless. Congratulations, Mr. Guan Qiong, you killed a troll. I hope you won't have nightmares about it tonight. There was a slight sarcasm at the corner of Snape's mouth, but not too much. Don't listen to him, child. You were very brave, saving your classmates single-handedly. It was a bit reckless, but that's how Gryffindors are. Professor McGonagall gently comforted Guan Qiong, her face filled with pride. 20 points from Gryffindor for your brave act. If neither of you is hurt, then return to the tower where the students are enjoying Halloween dinner. As for you, Miss Granger, I hope you won't be afraid of magic. The wizarding world, while dangerous, is also full of fun, Professor McGonagall said to Hermione. I won't, thank you, Professor McGonagall, Hermione nodded. Instead of fear, she was now full of fighting spirit and ready to learn more magic so that she could protect herself in the future when she encountered danger. After a short rest, Guan Qiong had recovered considerably. Before leaving, he thought for a moment and waved his wand. Hermione's stomach ache is because she drank the lemon juice on Harry's table. Ron ate the bacon in front of Harry and fell asleep just now. Professor McGonagall and Snape exchanged a glance, and Snape's eyes were cold, but only for a moment. I understand, children, you can go back first, Professor McGonagall said. Guan Qiong nodded and left with Hermione and Parvati. Chapter 7 Leisurely Campus Life. The troll incident was like a boulder thrown into a lake. While it caused a huge ripple at the time, things gradually calmed down over time. Undoubtedly, Guan Qiong's fame was instantly resounding. The entire house knew he had single-handedly defeated the troll and rescued a girl trapped in the bathroom. Professor McGonagall once publicly called him out in class, declaring him a true Gryffindor. Neville considered him a true warrior and wished he could be as brave as him. Others also praised his bravery, calling him a worthy Gryffindor. But Guan Qiong's life remained unaffected by this false reputation. In fact, over time, the story faded from people's minds, leaving only the few people involved in the incident with a lasting impression. Guan Qiong returned to his previous peaceful life, balancing between studying and practicing magic. Professor Flitwick's Charms class covered the unlocking and locking spells, two opposing spells that Guan Qiong saw as two intertwined spirals, giving him a headache. He had recently been practicing much longer. Professor Sprout's herbology class was still theoretical, with no hands-on practice. Professor Sprout would hold up objects while they took notes. Fortunately, first years didn't need much to memorize, so Guan Qiong only needed half a class period to memorize them, leaving him the remaining half to enjoy the sunshine in the greenhouse. As winter approached and the weather grew colder, Guan Qiong began to look forward to herbology. Wednesday night's astronomy class was a stark contrast to herbology. It was also short, and Guan Qiong could memorize it in half a class period. But for the remaining half, he had to endure the boredom and the cold, counting the seconds until the get-out-of-class ended. Fortunately, it only took one night a week, so he could bear it. Professor Snape's potions class, held in the dungeons, was much easier to learn than astronomy. As the ground temperature gradually dropped, the dungeons were actually warmer than the outside. However, the surrounding glass jars and the animal specimens inside them gave him a chilling feeling. Combined with Snape's perpetually gloomy, sallow face and his dark, tunnel-like eyes, the entire potions class felt like some kind of cult activity. However, Guan Qiong found potions class quite enjoyable. Although Snape targeted Gryffindor, his focus was always on Harry Potter, and he maintained a neutral attitude towards him. Brewing potions might seem cumbersome to others, but for him, it was a fascinating and simple task. Especially with his magical perspective, he could see the magical circuits of various potions being broken apart and then reassembled into new ones, which made his mastery of potion-making far superior to others. Even Snape had repeatedly compared his potions with Harry Potter's, praising him as a rare genius, far superior to some savior who was only in name only. Guan Qiong didn't get too proud of this, although Harry's potions grades were indeed less than ideal. Guan Qiong also made some progress in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. With increasing magical power and persistent observation and study, he finally understood a little bit of transfiguration. Within the object to be transformed, a magical skeleton is formed using magic to create the desired shape. This forces the object to move from its original form toward the skeleton, completing the transformation. The coarseness or fineness of the skeleton determines the effectiveness of the transformation. A simple stick figure-like skeleton will yield a poor result, while a detailed skeleton resembling human anatomy will yield excellent results. First-year transfiguration class only required transforming matches into needles, and the magical circuits weren't overly complex. Through practice, Guan Qiong finally became the second student, after Hermione, to achieve this feat. Madame Hooch's flying lessons were a pure relaxation for Guan Qiong. While soaring through the air was exciting for a while, he eventually grew accustomed to it. During flying class, students' speed and range were restricted to a certain range to ensure their safety, which was somewhat boring for Guan Qiong, a former biker gang member in his previous life. He had little interest in Quidditch, just as he had in football in his previous life, so he didn't perform particularly well in flying class, which in turn highlighted Harry's incredible talent. Professor Bin's History of Magic class was far from Guan Qiong's expectations. He'd expected it to be incredibly boring, so boring he'd be dozing off. After all, the book described Professor Bin's voice as monotonous and drowsy. Granted, Professor Bin's teaching style was certainly that way, like a university professor who only reads PowerPoint slides. But the content itself piqued Guan Qiong's interest, and his dedication was second only to charms. This made him a striking presence in the classroom. Even Hermione would occasionally pull out books from other classes, but Guan Qiong was the only one who listened attentively throughout the entire class. Later, Guan Qiong reflected on this and concluded it was probably a matter of perception. For those in this world, the history of magic was equivalent to their own history, something even Muggle wizards quickly accepted upon entering school. But for Guan Qiong, a large part of his soul came from another world, and the history of magic was like a brand new, unopened fantasy novel. Imagine if your history teacher didn't teach about Emperor Xiao, the son of Emperor Gaozu, but instead about white wizards fighting Balrogs in close combat, dark giants sweeping the Middle Ages, and the elves sacrificing their lives to save the forest court. How could it not be captivating? As for Professor Bin's incredibly flat, uninflected tone, for someone like Guan Qiong who often listened to novels on her phone, it was actually more familiar, even familiar. Because of this, his dedication to history of magic was second only to charms. Professor Bin's even awarded Gryffindor 5 extra points in recognition of his dedication. After all, that was a ghost, unique. Even the unyielding Hermione, after trying a few classes, had to admit that Guan Qiong was indeed superior to her in history of magic. And she might never catch up. Guan Qiong found joy in all 7 of the above classes. Even in astronomy, he could gaze at the beauty of the stars at night and marvel at the vastness of the universe. Only the last class, Quirrell's defense against the dark arts, left Guan Qiong with no joy at all. If he hadn't been worried about not being able to explain the source of the information, he would have thought of reporting Quirrell so that Hogwarts could have a new professor. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Hermione Relationship 1. Guan Qiong disliked Defense Against the Dark Arts class for 2 main reasons. First, Quirrell's teaching quality was mediocre. He stuttered, his knowledge was unclear, and he reeked of garlic, making it impossible to concentrate on anything else. Second, Quirrell carried Voldemort's presence, which made Guan Qiong afraid to use his magical perspective during class, let alone do anything else. If Voldemort noticed, he wouldn't be able to defeat him. Even a remnant of Voldemort's soul was far more powerful than a troll. Despite his immense talent, he was still just a minor wizard, so keeping a low profile was the best approach. This made Guan Qiong feel uncomfortable in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, much like other students in History of Magic class. Fortunately, Quirrell and Voldemort were only interested in the Philosopher's Stone and Harry Potter, and didn't pay much attention to him. Time passed slowly and evenly, and Guan Qiong's life became simple and regular. Attending classes, practicing spells in the Room of Requirement, studying in the library, and patrolling the Forbidden Forest, these 4 activities filled Guan Qiong's life throughout November, leaving him incredibly fulfilled. Patrols took place weekly on Friday nights. As assistant gamekeeper, Guan Qiong would accompany gamekeeper Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest to monitor the surrounding areas, preventing any dangerous creatures from escaping and harming Hogwarts students. Guan Qiong would receive a reduction in Hogwarts tuition and a monthly living allowance of 1 galleon. Unfortunately, As an orphanage resident, he had little money, let alone enough to support himself through school. Even his wand and books were purchased with money lent to him by Dumbledore. Patrolling the Forbidden Forest wasn't a chore, it was even easy. With Hagrid and Fang by his side, and always on the outskirts of the Forbidden Forest, Guan Qiong only needed to take a stroll every Friday night, and that was his job done. It was incredibly friendly to a first-year wizard. And, occasionally, he'd even receive unexpected rewards. It was another Friday. Jean left the room of requirement and went to the dining room for dinner before returning to the Gryffindor common room to change and go find Hagrid. "Hey, Jean, over here. Have you finished your History of Magic essay?" Ron's voice reached the Gryffindor common room just as she arrived, clearly waiting for him. Jean walked over to the trio's desks. Harry and Ron each had a piece of parchment in front of them, scrawled with scribbled words. It was only a short paragraph. They were scratching their heads, clearly unable to put together the second paragraph. Seeing Ron's eager expression and Harry's somewhat shamefaced yet yearning eyes, Jean smiled and took out a piece of parchment. She placed it in front of Hermione. Hermione also took out a piece of parchment and handed it to Jean. Neither of them spoke, a silent understanding. "Ah, Jean, you can't do this." Ron banged his head against the table, and Harry sighed. Jean shrugged, waved his wand, wrote 2 words, and turned to walk back to the dormitory. "Come on." Looking at the words floating in the air, Ron felt helpless and had to turn his gaze back to Hermione. "Hermione, no, you can't read it until you've finished writing. That's the only way to learn," Hermione said firmly, holding the parchment in her hand. The 2 men wailed loudly, but there was nothing they could do. They could only stare at the parchment, trying to squeeze a little more water out of their dry, rag-like heads. Meanwhile, Guan Qiong put Hermione's History of Magic homework away, planning to review it tomorrow. After the troll incident, Hermione's relationship with him, as the person involved, had improved significantly. Perhaps it had gone from being just a casual acquaintance to a close friend, and their daily interactions had increased. Whenever they were studying in the library, if he arrived first, Hermione would take the seat next to him, studying together and occasionally discussing problems. Of course, every time, Hermione would deliberately ask, "Qiong, is the seat next to you taken?" Or, "The library is so crowded today, Qiong, can I sit next to you?" to make it clear that she didn't want to sit with him, but rather that there was no room around. This perfectly embodies the 12-year-old's desire to be close to her friends while also avoiding overly assertive pride. If Hermione arrived at the library first, Guan Qiong would notice that Hermione had taken the seat next to her with her book. Upon seeing him, Hermione would quietly put her book away, but wouldn't wave to him. Instead, she would continue reading, only glancing at him from the corner of her eye. Guan Qiong would then continue the somewhat childish, yet endearing, game, approaching Hermione and asking if anyone was sitting next to her. Of course, the answer was no. If Guan Qiong didn't approach Hermione and instead sat down anywhere, he would occasionally feel a gaze fixed on her, tinged with a hint of anger. It was truly adorable. Of course, this was only part of Guan Qiong and Hermione's daily life. Most of the time, Guan Qiong practiced magic in the room of requirement, while Hermione, Harry, Ron, and the others worked out how to deal with Malfoy. When Guan Qiong typed those 2 lines, not only did Professor McGonagall and Snape understand, but the clever Hermione also figured it out. She found Ron and Harry, and the 3 of them joined forces to deal with the odious Malfoy. As for why they didn't seek out Guan Qiong, it was probably because there were 3 Malfoys, and they, being righteous, couldn't outnumber the few. Of course, it was also possible that they couldn't find Guan Qiong. After all, Guan Qiong spent most of her time away from the Gryffindor common room, but in the room of requirement, and didn't have much contact with them on a daily basis. In her dormitory, Guan Qiong changed out of her bulky wizard robes into lighter clothing, tied her wrists tightly at the cuffs, and donned sturdy waterproof high-top shoes. She then placed her wand on her left forearm. While she wouldn't encounter any danger, it was important to be vigilant, as there were still many dangerous things in school. Leaving the Gryffindor common room and out of Hogwarts Castle, Guan Qiong crossed a large lawn and arrived at Hagrid's hut. It was already getting dark, around 6 in the evening. Guan Qiong rubbed Fang's head vigorously at the door until Fang ran away with a chuckle. Then she knocked hard on the door. Who's outside?" a roaring voice echoed, followed by a series of crackling noises. Then, the door to the hut opened from the inside. A gigantic figure appeared before Guan Qiong, with long, unkempt hair, a thick, tangled beard, and a pair of bright, black beetle-like eyes. "Oh, it's Qiong. Is it Friday again? It's gone by so fast." Hagrid's voice softened, becoming much gentler. He patted his head with his giant hand to wake himself up. He had probably just been sleeping. Chapter 9 Hagrid. "Joan, come on in. Have you had dinner yet? I've got some freshly made rock cakes. Come try them." Hagrid led Joan into the hut, where a fire was burning brightly in the fireplace, making it unusually warm. Hagrid poured the dark brown rock cakes from a large shallow pot above the fireplace and placed them on the central table. He then brewed a cup of steaming hot coffee and placed it in front of Joan. Joan had been here many times before and wasn't shy. He sat comfortably on the sofa, watching Hagrid's work. However, he still declined the rock cakes. "Thank you, I've already had them. If I ever have indigestion, I'll try these." Joan waved his wand, and words floated on it. "That's a shame," Hagrid said, grabbing the rock cake with his huge hand and stuffing it directly into his mouth, not caring about the heat. "Give me a minute, I'll be done soon," Hagrid said, making a chewing sound. It was like a human-shaped stone crusher at work, sporadically dropping gravel-like debris. Guan Qiong watched Hagrid with keen interest. Hagrid's build was similar to the troll Guan Qiong had encountered before, both nearly 3 meters tall. However, Hagrid's vital circuits were far more complex and unusually thick and strong. Guan Qiong could confirm that the magic of ordinary wizards would be at least 2 times less effective on Hagrid, and the magic of lesser wizards like Harry and Ron would be completely useless. Guan Qiong hadn't tried it, so he wasn't sure. His only certainty was that Hagrid could send him from this hut to the Tower of the Gryffindor common room with a single punch. As Hagrid ate, his vital circuits absorbed the fragments of magic circuitry from the rock cake, emitting a faint glow and slowly thickening at a level so faint it was barely noticeable. Honestly, if it weren't for his poor teeth, Guan Qiong would have loved to try the giant's food. Without keeping Guan Qiong waiting for long, Hagrid quickly devoured the entire rock cake, then let out a series of burps, like a strong wind blowing through the cave, causing the meat strips hanging from the ceiling to sway. "Okay, June, I'm full. Just a little longer, we'll be leaving soon," Hagrid said, looking at June, who sat quietly by the side, sipping her coffee. He began to pack his gear for the Forbidden Forest, first picking up a lantern and handing it to Guan Qiong, then his umbrella. After a moment's thought, he pulled out a hat made of some unidentified fur. "It's getting wintry, and the Forbidden Forest won't be very warm at night, June. You need to wear this." Before Guan Qiong could react, Hagrid had already placed the hat on her head, patting it gently twice. Reluctantly, June pulled the hat higher, revealing her eyes. The hat was so large that it could fit half of Guan Qiong's head. "Let me see what else I have. Oh, and this too." Hagrid took down a nearby cowhide waterskin, removed the humming kettle from the fireplace, and filled it with hot water. "That way, when you're cold, June, you can have a drink to keep warm." Hagrid laughed. "Actually, I usually prefer to bring wine, but you're still too young. You can try it in your 3rd year." Hagrid winked at Guan Qiong and slung the waterskin around his waist. Guan Qiong took a closer look at the waterskin. Even though she had seen it before, she still found it quite interesting. There was a formed magical circuit on it, presumably for warmth or something. "Okay, June, before we go, I have to emphasize something. This might annoy you, but I'm going to explain it again." Hagrid stood before Guan Qiong, his usually gentle face becoming serious, a bit intimidating. Guan Qiong remained silent, her eyes fixed on Hagrid, indicating that she was listening intently. "First, you are not allowed to leave Fang and me, not even a meter away." Hagrid held up a finger, and Guan Qiong nodded in agreement. "Second, you are not allowed to use any magic, except in extremely dangerous situations." Hagrid held up a second finger, then added, "including your improved illumination charm." "Third, as always, don't pick up too many things in the Forbidden Forest." This requirement was actually added later, because patrols in the Forbidden Forest often come across some strange things, precious herbs, rare minerals, and even scales, horns, and fur left behind by magical creatures. Hagrid would pick some up and sell them for his own income, or send them to the academy to replenish its stores. As an assistant, Guan Qiong could also pick up these things, but unlike Hagrid's completely random pickings, Guan Qiong had a unique magical vision. Some things were hidden deep, inconspicuous, or even buried underground, and Guan Qiong could see them all. It didn't matter if they didn't recognize it, as long as the magic circuits were complex and dazzling enough. The more circuits, the better, the thicker the circuit, the stronger. Anyway, pick them all up. Hagrid didn't care at first, until one day, when he was selling a humble grey wheat root with blue spots on it for Guan Qiong. It turned out to be an extremely rare and ancient species of stardust, fetching a whopping 15 galleons. It dawned on him that everything Guan Qiong found was truly exceptional. The stardust grass eventually joined Snape's collection, and Guan Qiong was rewarded with 15 galleons and a request. Don't pick up too many things in the Forbidden Forest, Guan Qiong understood. After all, the Forbidden Forest was considered Hogwarts property, and all the herbs and herbs therein were, in fact, Hogwarts property. The school didn't take his finds for free, but instead gave him a reward. This was a sign of the school's generosity, a willingness to let him off the hook. Those 15 galleons repaid the money Dumbledore had lent him for wands and books, and the remaining amount became his pocket money. This allowed him to live a much more carefree life than the average young wizard, at least his pocket money was enough. Furthermore, he was only forbidden from picking up anything too expensive that would affect the Forbidden Forest's ecology. Hogwarts didn't mind ordinary items worth a few shillings to a galleon, and Hagrid would even help him sell them. It could be said that among all the first-year wizards, except for Harry, whose family background was more affluent and who had more pocket money than him, no other wizard could compare to him. Chapter 10 Forbidden Forest. After completing all preparations, Hagrid, along with Gwen and Fang the Hound, headed for the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest, located adjacent to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, harbors numerous magical creatures and unique plants associated with magic. Deep within the forest, several intelligent non-human races exist, including centaurs, achromatic spiders, and werewolves. However, these were not relevant to today's patrol. Gwen and Hagrid would only be confined to the outer reaches of the forest, where ordinary beech and oak trees predominated. Only within these hidden areas could magical animals and herbs be found. The sun had already set, leaving only the faint glow of stars in the sky. In the darkness, the dense forest was utterly silent. The towering trees and dense foliage obscured the lights of Hogwarts, leaving the surroundings utterly dark. But that night, the stillness and darkness of the outer reaches of the Forbidden Forest were shattered. The sound of a giant's footsteps on fallen branches echoed loudly throughout the forest, followed by the blazing light of a bright lantern, illuminating the surrounding area within a 5-meter radius. Hagrid led the way, with Guan Qiong following closely behind, followed by Fang, alert to what was coming from behind. As a hound, he always performed well. Guan Qiong followed Hagrid, observing his surroundings. Of course, he used his magical perspective. The air was thick with magical energy, not forming a circuit, but rather, permeating the entire Forbidden Forest like the air itself. The surrounding tall oak trees, the vines on them, and the moss in the damp, shady ground had all accumulated some magical energy under the influence of this environment, but it couldn't form a circuit, and ultimately, it couldn't become a true magical plant. Guan Qiong breathed in the magical energy in the air and could feel his own magical energy slowly growing. In fact, it had been growing continuously since he began to sense the magic, but the rate of increase varied depending on the surrounding environment. Tonight's harvest wasn't particularly good. Judging by the shifting of the stars in the sky, halfway through the night, he had only found one flower with a complete magical circuit. Hagrid took a look and estimated the price to be around 3 sickles. It was better than nothing. Just when Guan Qiong thought today would pass peacefully like every other patrol, there was a sudden movement from their left front. Tap, tap, tap. The movement of an ungulate creature was unmistakable, and judging by the sound of it darting through the trees and the vibrations of the ground, it was quite large. June, take this, stand behind me. Fang, protect June. Hagrid handed Guan Qiong the lantern and held him behind him with both hands. He then pulled out his umbrella and pointed it forward. Fang approached Guan Qiong from behind, his mouth clenched to reveal his sharp teeth, and a menacing growl emanated from his throat. Guan Qiong remained unfazed. With Hagrid by her side, even if danger arose, he could hold out until help arrived from Hogwarts Castle. Furthermore, Guan Qiong wondered if there were any dangerous creatures in the Forbidden Forest who didn't recognize Hagrid. Had Hagrid truly fed any of them? Rather than worrying about danger, Guan Qiong was more curious about the creatures' life circuits and whether there was anything special about them. As the noise grew louder and closer, Guan Qiong noticed that Hagrid's body relaxed a little, though he remained vigilant ahead. It seemed he recognized the creature. Soon, a creature Guan Qiong had heard of and seen pictures of appeared before him. It was a centaur. The centaur was split at the waist, the upper half human, the lower half of a horse. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, the centaur's life circuits were truly remarkable. The upper half's circuits were identical to those of humans he had seen, while the lower half was a circuit unlike anything he had seen before. These two circuits connected in a complex pattern at the waist, like a tangled ball of thread with no apparent source, leaving Guan Qiong dizzy. "Oh, Ronan, it's you. I guessed it was one of you centaurs," Hagrid said, lowering his umbrella and greeting him. "Hello, Hagrid," Ronan said to Hagrid, but his red eyes glanced past Hagrid to gaze at Guan Qiong, who was standing behind him. "Hello, Voidstar." His voice was deep and mysterious, its tone inflected, like a priest muttering the name of a god. Guan Qiong, puzzled, looked at Hagrid. "What is Voidstar?" Hagrid asked a question for Guan Qiong, extending his hand to introduce Guan Qiong. "This is Guan Qiong, a student at Hogwarts School, and this is Ronan, a centaur. We're familiar with each other, and you can trust him," Hagrid introduced Ronan to Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong nodded. He also remembered the name Ronan. He had appeared in the Philosopher's Stone. If he remembered correctly, there were two other centaurs, one named Bang and the other named Firenze. However, only Ronan had come this time, with no other centaurs following him. "Oh, Guan Qiong," Ronan looked at Guan Qiong, his red eyes fixed on something else. "Good evening, nice to meet you." Guan Qiong touched the base of her wand, and a string of light flew out from the tip of the wand on her arm. "Good evening, nice to see you too." "Oh, well, Guan Qiong isn't aphasic, you know, unable to speak. He's adapted the illumination charm as a method of communication," Hagrid explained. "Very impressive," Ronan praised. As he spoke, Ronan stared at Guan Qiong, making her feel a little uncomfortable. "Excuse me, what are illusory stars?" Perhaps because of the centaurs, Hagrid hadn't forbidden Guan Qiong from using magic to communicate. "Don't worry, Qiong," Hagrid said. "Centaurs are always mysterious. They observe the stars, but they don't tell others what they see directly, just like us human fortune tellers." Hagrid's tone was resigned. He must have seen something before, but to Hagrid's surprise, Ronan explained to Guan Qiong. "Illusory stars are stars that didn't exist at the moment, but have appeared now." Guan Qiong couldn't understand. What did it mean to appear when something didn't exist? Did it really exist or not? Guan Qiong didn't ask any more questions, feeling that the centaurs wouldn't be able to speak in a way he could understand. "So, what are you doing here?" Guan Qiong asked the centaur's purpose instead. "I saw the guidance of the virtual star. You can help me," Ronan replied. He pulled out a strange-shaped plant from behind his back and showed it to Guan Qiong. "This plant is called Few. It grows underground, so it's hard to find. I need a lot of this herb. I hope you can help me find it." Guan Qiong stared at the plant called Few. Chapter 11, Filch's Thoughts. The Few plant was gray in color. From its thickest, root-like structure, 5 thinner stems branched out. Around these stems grew thin, gray, leaf-like structures. They resembled a human hand, or a duck's paw. From a magical perspective, the entire plant looked more like a human hand, grasping something. Being able to see the magical circuits was a plus. By being able to see them, he could spot anything, whether hidden underground, nestled in the heart of a tree, or deep within a rock. External appearances didn't distract him, he could see the essence. "You don't need to dig. Just find where it is and tell me where it is, and I'll dig it," Ronan said. Guan Qiong thought for a moment and nodded. Putting aside the potential reward, at least this would earn Ronan the centaur's friendship, which would be much easier if he needed to do anything else in the Forbidden Forest. "Thank you very much, Zooxing." Ronan slightly bent his front legs, looking to the right, his right hand resting on his stomach, expressing his gratitude to Guan Qiong. It was a very strange gesture, but Guan Qiong roughly understood it. Perhaps it was a centaur ritual of expressing gratitude. "Anything else?" "Guan Qiong has classes tomorrow, and it's too late to get up tomorrow," Hagrid asked Ronan. Guan Qiong wanted to say that tomorrow was actually Saturday and there were no classes, but he didn't say it. "It's all right. Goodbye, Hagrid." "Goodbye, Guan Qiong." Ronan gave Guan Qiong one last, piercing look with his red eyes, as if he saw something special about him, then turned and ran deep into the Forbidden Forest. His brown-red fur and red tail made him look like a ball of red flame, speeding through the black forbidden forest. Do you understand what the centaurs mean by empty stars? Hagrid returned the lantern to his own hand and turned to Guan Qiong. No, I don't understand it all. A flash of light flew from Guan Qiong's wand. Yet, sometimes it's better not to explain, Hagrid said as he walked. Okay, June, stop using that illumination charm. Let's hurry up. It's a cold night. Hagrid stood in front, shielding Guan Jun from the night breeze while pushing aside some overgrown branches and grass. Guan Jun followed silently, followed by Fang at the very end. He shook himself, exhaled a puff of white air, and nodded in agreement. The second half of the journey passed without incident. Guan Jun didn't see anything rare along the way, nor did Fu He. They could only hope to find something when they changed the route next week. Because of Ronan, they returned a little later than usual. By the time Guan Jun reached the castle, it was already around 11 o'clock in the evening. Hogwarts Castle was deserted, even the ghosts had stopped wandering. The surrounding stone walls were chilly. Guan Jun hugged his shoulders and shivered. I'll have to wear thicker clothes next time I go out, Guan Jun thought. Suddenly, he felt something furry at his feet. He glanced down and met a pair of pale, bright eyes. It was Mrs. Norris, the cat of Hogwarts caretaker, Filch. A playful smile played on her lips, and she gazed at Guan Qiong with a defiant gaze. Then, she opened her mouth and let out a sharp cry. Meow, the sound resonated, instantly shattering the castle's chill. Then, she looked at Guan Qiong, eager to see the terrified expression of this student caught wandering the night, the panicked flight of the students. Of course, she would chase him, not letting him escape until he was caught by her master, Filch. That way, she would receive Filch's reward, a delicious dried fish. But she was disappointed. Guan Qiong simply looked at her calmly, showing no sign of fleeing. No wonder those students want to beat you to death every day. You deserve to die for your behavior. Guan Qiong wasn't nervous. He wasn't a student wandering the night, and Filch had a pretty good relationship with him, anyway. Guan Qiong didn't have to wait long. After just a few seconds, Filch's voice rang out from the front. Oh, baby, did you catch them? Those damned students, we're going to teach them a lesson this time. Even before he arrived, Filch's equally shrill, morbidly excited voice reached him. Norris stayed behind Guan Qiong to prevent him from escaping, meowing occasionally to point out Filch's location. But she was doomed to disappointment. Filch came running out from the front, panting and grunting, a rope in hand, as if intending to tie Guan Qiong up. But upon seeing Guan Qiong, his excited expression froze, like the frost outside. Ah, it's Mr. Guan Qiong, Filch said, his expression tinged with disappointment, yet he still managed a basic smile. It's Friday again, isn't it? Look at me, all day long, all those students are causing trouble. I'm so busy, Filch said with a smile, his manner very friendly and warm. Just got back from outside. A little late today. Guan Qiong touched the bottom of her wand, and a point of light flew out. I know. You're different from those guys who wander the night. You're going to patrol the Forbidden Forest on Friday. Mr. Dumbledore told me so, Filch said, putting away the rope in his hand and picking up the cat that was rubbing against a corner of his pants at his feet. I'm so sorry, Norris can't tell the difference between you and the other students. How could she know that you are completely different from the other students? You are a rare genius with talent that can catch up with Mr. Dumbledore, Filch praised her, and then sighed heavily. It's a pity that you are a phasic. What a pity. Otherwise, you would have caught up with Dumbledore soon. He seemed to really feel sorry for Guan Qiong's condition, and his face was full of regret. If you weren't a phasic, you'd be miles ahead of the other students by now, instead of like this. First year, let me think. Oh, fire charms, that's a bit tricky. If you weren't a phasic, you'd definitely be able to use fire charms at will by now. Filch's lips curled up unconsciously, but he suppressed it, speaking sympathetically in a sad tone. Guan Qiong's mouth twitched. He didn't want to argue with Filch anymore. He was freezing. Light flashed from his wand. It's getting late. I'm going back to bed. Filch looked at Guan Qiong's wand and the light flashing from it, his eyes dimming slightly. Oh, of course, I'm disturbing you. For a wizard like you, rest is the most important thing. Filch carried Mrs. Norris and stepped out of the way. Guan Qiong left, heading towards the Gryffindor common room. Filch, on the other hand, left in the opposite direction, to catch the student who was wandering around at night, whose existence he didn't know. Chapter 12, Magic Empire Yells. The next day, Saturday, it was already 9 in the morning when Guan Qiong woke up. The dorm was deserted. There were no classes today, but there was a Quidditch match. This was the first match of the school year, and Harry's first time playing, and everyone else was there to cheer him on. As for Guan Qiong, he wasn't particularly interested in Quidditch, just like he hadn't watched much football in his previous life, even though everyone around him loved it. Yesterday, he'd emphasized to the others in the dorm that they didn't need to wake him up for the match today, letting him sleep in. The others were understanding, though they felt it was a loss that Guan Qiong wasn't attending. Ron kept muttering, how could anyone not like Quidditch, and repeatedly insisting that Quidditch was the most fun sport in the world. Guan Qiong didn't argue with Ron, even though he thought skydiving and rock climbing were the most fun. All in all, today would be a beautiful, normal day, starting with a lion until 9 o'clock. He planned to read in the library in the morning and soak up the sun on the grass outside in the afternoon. Of course, it's also possible he went to the room of requirement to practice magic. He had trouble controlling the magic circuits for the unlocking and locking charms. After enjoying a steak and kidney pie and sausage breakfast in the dining hall, Guan Qiong arrived at the Hogwarts Library. Located on the second floor of Hogwarts Castle, the library boasted thousands of shelves, housing tens of thousands of books. Boxes of books, collected over countless years by Hogwarts, were organized into categories. Nearest the desks, where ordinary books were easily accessible, lay the restricted section, housing countless books containing tainted with evil magic. The entire library was overseen by Madame Irma Pants, a strict and rule-abiding woman with a gaunt, elderly face that resembled a malnourished vulture. This frightened many students, especially when she was clutching a feather duster. However, her love for books was undeniable. She was often angered by students who damaged books, but she was willing to help those who studied diligently and followed the rules. Just like now, when Guan Qiong arrived at the library, Madame Pants greeted her with a smile. Welcome, Qiong. You enjoy reading as always. Would you like to continue with the book you read last time? Guan Qiong nodded. Madame Pants understood and raised her right hand. A General History of Magic in the Middle Ages, a heavy magic book squeezed itself out of the bookshelf, circling the surrounding shelves, and flew into Madame Pants's hands. Summoning spells, this was something only learned in 4th grade. Guan Qiong had just opened her magical vision and, as expected, was bewildered by the magic circuits. There aren't many young wizards who enjoy reading anymore, Qiong. I hope you can keep it up. Madame Pants handed Guan Qiong the General History of Magic in her hand and encouraged her. Thank you. A flash of light flew from Guan Qiong's wand. What a magic that's perfect for a library. It's a shame it's too difficult for them. Pants watched Guan Qiong's wand spell, feeling a little regretful. Guan Qiong didn't chat much. He took his copy of A General History of Magic in the Middle Ages and found an empty seat. Of course, he also casually placed the parchment he had brought on the seat next to him, taking up his place. Madame Pants watched Guan Qiong quickly become absorbed in the world of books and felt a sense of admiration. Such diligence and talent, if only he weren't a phasic. With a final thought, she sighed. Guan Qiong opened A General History of Magic in the Middle Ages and, instead of continuing where he had left off, flipped to a point slightly earlier. That was also where Professor Binns had covered the previous lecture and left a paper as homework. The fall of the magical empire of Yers in the 17th century BC. It was called an empire, but in reality it was just a small island in the ocean, about 1/12 the size of Great Britain. It wasn't particularly remarkable, and the magical world's interest in it was simply because it had once housed a nation ruled entirely by wizards. Yers. Therefore, the island was named Yers Island for easier memorization. It's worth noting that during that era, wizards were often persecuted. Meanwhile, on the island of Yers, wizards ruled over all the islanders and established a magical empire. This had a profound impact on the history of wizards and humans. However, the Yers magical empire didn't last long. Within 100 years, it collapsed. All wizards on the island were annihilated, and then all humans perished, leaving only ruins. Through the excavation of Yers ruins and the analysis of remaining documents, the wizarding world has finally unraveled the truth of the time. The cause of the Yers magical empire's destruction was surprisingly. Just as Guan Qiong was about to review this section of information, Hermione suddenly ran in. Her expression was anxious, as if she had encountered something urgent. Arriving in the library, she glanced around, and upon seeing Guan Qiong, she rushed towards him. Madame Pants clenched her feather duster, her expression grim. Hermione ran over to Guan Qiong, grabbed his shoulder, made him face her, and spoke sternly. June, something's happened to Harry, huh? Hermione suddenly pulled her out of the book, her mind a blur. She couldn't even grab her wand, much less think about what could have happened to Harry. He couldn't possibly have killed himself playing Quidditch, could he? Wait? Quidditch? Then she remembered. Harry had indeed encountered something during their first Quidditch match. Voldemort's possessed Quirrell had cursed Harry, and it was Snape who had saved him. Just as she was about to draw her wand, Madame Pants slid past them. Miss Granger, while you're talking, would you mind where you are? Madame Pants's eyes hawked at Hermione, seemingly considering where to throw the feather duster. Oh, sorry, Madame Pants, we'll be leaving now, Hermione said, reacting quickly and apologizing. She grabbed Jean's hand and started to leave. Her anxiety was evident, and her grip was much stronger than usual, nearly dragging Jean away. In the end, Guan Qiong only had time to pick up the parchment that occupied the seat next to her, made an apologetic expression to Madame Pants, and was dragged away by Hermione. Madame Pants shook her head, picked up the general history of magic in the Middle Ages on the table, and put it back to its original place on the bookshelf. Chapter 13 Hermione Relationship 2. After exiting the library, Hermione paused and spoke eagerly to Guan Qiong. Just now during the Quidditch match, Harry was cursed by Snape and nearly fell off his broom. It was indeed the incident. Guan Qiong was now connecting with the plot of the Philosopher's Stone. He slowly took out his wand, and a light flew from it. Is Harry okay? Harry is fine. I set Snape's robes on fire with a flaming spell, forcing him to stop cursing. Harry even caught the golden snitch, and Gryffindor defeated Slytherin. That sounds good. No one was hurt, and we won, Guan Qiong said. Indeed, but that's not important now. Hermione's expression was more serious than ever. Snape actually dared to curse Harry. I didn't believe it before, but now I do. He must be you-know-who's spy, helping him steal something. Guan Qiong looked at her, finding her intrigued. She hadn't felt that way when she'd read about it in her previous life, but when she faced it firsthand, especially when Hermione was only 12, the whole thing took on a childish, fairy-tale-like quality. Hermione's words were like a child's story about their teacher planning to build a bomb to destroy the world, and they were going to stop this evil teacher from stealing the bomb-making materials. The materials were kept in a secure location by their headmaster, requiring numerous hurdles to obtain. In reality, the so-called materials were just some sugar, kept so securely, presumably to prevent students from stealing and damaging their teeth. But for the immature children, the whole thing felt like a grand adventure to save the world, a thrill that made them willing to break even the most ordinary school rules. Seeing Guan Qiong's expression, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, Hermione realized, oh, I haven't told you about this yet. I've been too busy, and I didn't think it was right to bother you with this. Hermione related the previous events. When Hagrid and Harry were withdrawing money, they retrieved something from Gringotts on Dumbledore's behalf. Gringotts was robbed on the very day Hagrid and Harry were there. They saw the three-headed dog and the trapdoor behind it one night in the fourth-floor room. Snape's leg had been injured, and it was a bite wound. And finally, today, Snape cast a curse on Harry, intending to harm him. So, what happened is, Dumbledore placed something very valuable in the fourth-floor room and had the three-headed dog guard it, and Snape has been trying to get his hands on it. It must have something to do with you-know-who. Snape is you-know-who's spy at the Academy. I heard he has a criminal record, so I don't know why Professor Dumbledore allowed him to teach there, Hermione concluded, but Guan Qiong's thoughts wandered elsewhere. What does a three-headed dog's life circuit look like? With 3 heads, would it be different from ordinary creatures? What about the magic circuitry of the Philosopher's Stone? That thing can turn stone into gold. If he could understand the magic circuitry inside, wouldn't he be able to master the alchemy? The Philosopher's Stone can also be used to create the elixir of life. If he learned that, could he simulate it with magic, making himself immortal? He was really curious. Ever since discovering his unique magical perspective, Guan Qiong had been using it to observe new things, except Quirrell. Whether he understood it or learned it was another matter, but he found it particularly fascinating. It was a bit like a child with a kaleidoscope, wanting to see all the variations. June. Are you listening? Hermione brought Guan Qiong back to her senses. I'm listening, the words flew from Guan Qiong's wand. Hermione continued, originally, I didn't want to bother you with all this, but the situation is different now. Snape dared to curse Harry today, and he'll break into the room on the 4th floor tomorrow. We have to stop him before that happens. Guan Qiong understood Hermione's meaning. So, you want me to tell Professor Dumbledore all this? Dumbledore had fought to get him into Hogwarts, so many people believe he treated him differently. Yes, I just told Hagrid all this, but he didn't believe it. He thought Snape, a teacher, couldn't possibly harm Harry, Hermione explained. But I saw it with my own eyes, and I can't be wrong. So I hope you can tell Professor Dumbledore and ask him to take it seriously. It would be best if Snape was arrested and the whereabouts of the you-know-who were found. Guan Qiong looked at Hermione. The 12-year-old girl had already demonstrated her ability to handle situations. She analyzed the situation rationally and found a solution. If it were Harry or Ron, they would probably only consider confronting Snape head-on. However, they were only 12 years old, immature, and needed guidance. Guan Qiong thought to herself, and a light flew out of the wand in her hand. I'm sorry, Hermione, I'm afraid I have to refuse you. Hermione's expression froze. She stared at Guan Qiong with her amber eyes, her mouth slightly open, her face full of surprise, as if she couldn't believe that Guan Qiong would refuse her proposal. Professor Snape is a professor at Hogwarts after all. I don't think he would cast a curse on Harry. As for whether he is Voldemort's accomplice, it's just your guess, Guan Qiong continued. But I saw it with my own eyes. Hermione raised her voice and clenched her fists. Seeing it with your own eyes is not necessarily correct. It may also be misleading. Guan Qiong took out the parchment, and on it was Hermione's paper for History of Magic, and the title was exactly The Cause of the Fall of the Magical Empire of Years and the Lessons We Can Learn from It. Years was destroyed by a misjudgment by the magic prince Hisi. Seeing the Archmage dissecting corpses and severing the arms of living people within the magic tower, Hisi assumed the Archmage was researching dark magic. He ambushed him during a celebration and exposed his crimes. However, the Archmage was actually searching for a cure. King Years, suffering from a contagious disease and nearing death, ordered the Archmage to dissect the bodies of those also infected to find a cure. Hisi was away from the palace at the time. Ultimately, the Archmage's death slowed the progress of infectious disease research. King Years died, and humanity revolted. The magical empire lost its two most powerful wizards, unable to combat the rebellion, and the empire collapsed. All wizards were slain, and no one could study infectious diseases anymore. Years later, all humans succumbed to the disease and died. This was the truth behind the fall of the magical empire of Years, stemming from a single misjudgment by Hisi. Hermione looked at her paper, and Guan Qiong, as usual, marked areas for improvement. The destruction of Yells tells us that what we see isn't always right. We need to make our own judgments, seizing this opportunity. Guan Qiong prepared to lecture Hermione. But Hermione gave him a hateful look, pouting, and ran away. Chapter 14 Magic Infinite Loop. Hermione angrily ran back to the Gryffindor common room, where Harry and Ron were already sitting, waiting. So, when is Jean going to tell Professor Dumbledore? Ron asked anxiously. Hermione sat heavily in front of them, slammed the parchment in her hand on the table, and said angrily, John doesn't believe me. He thinks Snape is a professor at Hogwarts and wouldn't hurt Harry. How come? Ron said loudly. We saw it with our own eyes. Snape cast a spell on Harry's broomstick, and Harry almost fell off it. But when you set his robes on fire, Harry's broomstick was fine. I told him that too, but he didn't believe it, Hermione said indignantly, her eyes glaring. He even used this history of magic paper as an example, saying that what you see isn't necessarily correct. Did you ask Jean about Nicholas Flamel? Harry interrupted. It was certain that Snape intended to kill him, but he now wanted to know what Dumbledore had hidden on the 4th floor. That would reveal Snape's intentions. Hagrid revealed that the object was connected to a man named Nicholas Flamel. I didn't ask, Hermione said bitterly, her amber eyes gleaming with seriousness and a fierce competitive spirit. HMPH, there's no need to ask him. We'll find Nicholas Flamel ourselves, and we'll stop Snape's scheme and show him who's right. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, sensing each other's unease. Hermione's expression gave him a feeling something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, Gwen ignored Hermione's escape, believing it was just a little girl throwing a tantrum. Eventually, she would realize that the seemingly gloomy and terrifying Snape was actually protecting Harry, while the seemingly honest Quirrell was the villain hiding within the school. Then, she would surely understand the lesson Gwennon was trying to teach her. He now returned to the room of requirement on the 8th floor. He still had some time today, so he might as well practice some spells. The first-year charms textbook was standard spells, elementary, which listed the 6 main spells first-year wizards were required to learn: illumination, levitation, unlocking, locking, softening, and flaming. He had already mastered the illumination and levitation spells silently, and had even modified the illumination spell to make it easier to communicate with others. The current class was teaching the unlocking and locking spells. These 2 spells were taught together because they acted on the same object. One unlocked a door, while the other locked it. In most cases, the unlocking spell could open a door locked by the locking spell, or in other words, it could be used to undo the locking spell. But what if the locking spell was cast by Dumbledore? Obviously, ordinary wizards would be unable to open a door locked by Dumbledore, even if they used the unlocking spell. Guan Qiong considered this, and after seeing the magic circuits of the unlocking and locking spells, his conjecture became even more certain. The magic circuit of the unlocking spell is not much different from that of the locking spell. If they were put together, they could even form something like a DNA spiral. And these 2 spirals, like the illuminating spell, can be extended indefinitely. The unlocking spell undoes the locking spell by starting with the end of the locking spell's spiral. Then, along the same spiral, an identical magic circuit is drawn with magic power, but in the opposite direction. When these 2 circuits meet, the locking spell is lifted, the magic circuits cancel each other out, and eventually, the magic power dissipates into the air. Therefore, if the locking spell's spiral is too long, the wizard's unlocking spell will not be able to complete this process of connection, and the locking spell cannot be lifted. For other wizards, whether they can lift an unlocking spell depends on whether they have enough magic power to form a magic circuit of the same length as the locking spell. For Guan Qiong, dispelling the unlocking charm depended solely on the length of his magical control. Similarly, understanding the principles of the unlocking and locking charms, he could ensure that the locking charms he cast possessed a magical circuit several, even dozens of times longer than that of other wizards, ensuring that ordinary wizards could not open them. Guan Qiong pulled out a notebook hidden within his robes and waved his wand. A spiral circuit appeared, unlocking the small lock on the notebook. He couldn't guarantee the professors, but the students, even the seniors, wouldn't be able to open his notebook and read his notes. Although he hadn't written anything illegal, Guan Qiong took out his quill and began to record his spell practice today and his analysis of the magic circuits. He certainly wasn't foolish enough to write a diary or write down the plot of Harry Potter in Chinese. This was simply a notebook for recording his experience with magic circuits and spells, nothing more. He ticked the boxes after the unlocking and locking charms, drew 2 intertwining spirals underneath, and wrote down his thoughts. He jotted down a few more ideas, like using the locking charm on the envelope, so only those who could remove it could see the contents. He would experiment with these later when he had time. He turned his attention to the 2 unchecked spells at the back. The last 2 spells first-year wizards were required to learn, the softening charm and the fire charm. The fire charm was considered an offensive spell, and a wizard who learned it would gain some combat power, even if it was only a little. But at least, they could burn robes or something, or at least keep a fire going in winter. But Guan Qiong decided to put it aside and learn the softening charm first. He had seen other wizards use the softening charm several times and memorized the circuit so he could practice it himself. He had also seen others use the fire charm several times. Hermione had demonstrated it to him. But unfortunately, he didn't remember the circuit for the fire charm. Or rather, he wasn't sure if he had. The circuit was different every time he saw it. The last time Hermione used the fire charm, the circuit was different from the one before that. The fire charm Hermione had used the other time before had a different circuit than the one Professor Flitwick had used beside her. And the circuits for these 4 fire charms were also different. Although Guan Qiong had memorized them all and recorded them in his notebook, when he tried them one by one, he found that none of them worked. So, he put the fire charm aside for now and started learning the softening charm. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Winter is Coming. Guan Qiong's life calmed down again, even more so than before. Hermione seemed genuinely angry with him. She no longer saved him a seat in the library, nor would she discuss problems with him in the Gryffindor common room. She even stopped asking him to review his history of magic essay. The only time they'd ever met was when Hermione would snort loudly, then turn her nose up and scurry away in a haughty manner. She was like a cat at odds with its owner, a brown Persian at that. Guan Qiong didn't mind it. How could a little girl's anger affect a grown man like him? Besides, he wasn't wrong. Just because Snape looked like a bad guy, acted like a bad guy, and dressed like a bad guy, didn't mean he was a bad guy. Who knew someone else was undercover? His life remained largely the same: classes, spell practice, library reading, and patrolling the Forbidden Forest. The only difference was that he'd added a few of his own ideas for how to use spells in his spell practice. The previous encounter with the troll had left a lasting impression on him, and it had also exposed his own shortcomings. He clearly had an easier way, yet he still exhausted his magical energy before he could defeat the troll, a sign of his lack of experience in spells. In contrast to Hermione's angry indifference, Harry and Ron would often ask him to borrow their homework, especially their history of magic essays. They had no idea what to write, and were just short of falsifying history, which was always excruciating. Unfortunately, most of the time, they couldn't find Guan Qiong and had to finish the work themselves. The few times they could find Guan Qiong, Hermione would glare at them, and they still had to finish the work painfully. Furthermore, during this time, Hermione had asked them to work together to find information about Nicholas Flamel, forcing them to squeeze even more of their already limited free time into reading vast amounts of books they had no interest in, further exacerbating their suffering. "Those books are so thick they could be used as bricks in a city wall," Ron complained, but under Hermione's command, he was forced to flip through the books that could have been used as bricks, searching through the densely packed words that made him dizzy, searching for someone named Nicholas Flamel. Fortunately, due to Quidditch practice, Harry didn't have to spend all his spare time reading. Otherwise, he might need thicker glasses by Christmas break. "Can I really ask Jean? I'm sure he knows who Nicholas Flamel is. He loves reading these books," Ron couldn't help but ask after encountering Jean again in the library. He was still holding Great Wizards of the 20th Century, the book's last reader being Jean. Ron watched him turn to the last page and put it back on the shelf. Hermione noticed this too, so she quickly borrowed it and gave it to Ron to read. As for herself, she was already reading another book as thick as 2 bricks. "No," Hermione gritted her teeth. "We can't ask him for help. We have to investigate everything on our own, then you can prove to him that you're right, that you're better than him, right?" Ron muttered softly. But Hermione still heard it and glared at him. Ron immediately lowered his head guiltily, flipping through the book in his hand. Even though they knew it was a quarrel between Hermione and Guan Qiong, they had to help Hermione because she was the only one who did their homework quickly and well, and was willing to check their homework, pointing out mistakes and giving the correct answers. Of course, if Guan Qiong was willing to give them the homework directly, they could help her. However, they couldn't find Guan Qiong most of the time, and they didn't know where she had gone. Time passed quickly, and Guan Qiong noticed what Hermione and the others were doing, but faced with Harry and Ron's painful, pleading looks, Guan Qiong simply ignored them. After all, reading more books is always a good thing. They'd probably read more during this time than they had in the previous year. This was a rare opportunity to accumulate knowledge, and Guan Qiong wouldn't interrupt them. And the books were so engaging, like novels, they could be finished in a matter of seconds. That's how Guan Qiong felt. Christmas was approaching, and the weather was getting colder. Snow began to fall around Hogwarts, melting back onto the ground and turning the lawn into a swampy, muddy mess. Guan Qiong didn't want to go out in these conditions, but he had to. Christmas was approaching, and it was customary here to give gifts to friends. He had nothing, so he had to ask Hagrid for help buying something. Fortunately, he'd earned some money from the Forbidden Forest, so he wasn't short of gifts. Walking outside on the lawn, the biting wind whistled through his wizard robes, and he couldn't help but tighten his clothes, trying to keep warm. Professor Dumbledore had said he'd give him a pair of wool socks, but he wondered what color he'd like. Guan Qiong pondered, pulling his leg out of the hole. "Professor McGonagall, a cat toy? Then the next day, I'd be turned into a teething plate for stepping into class with my left foot." Guan Qiong shook his head, letting the cool breeze bring his thoughts back to normal. How about an oriental hairpin? It seems to suit. Guan Qiong nodded inwardly, deciding, but he just hoped it wasn't too expensive. Professor Flitwick, a nice tall hat would be useful. Professor Snape, I'm thinking of giving him a chemistry lab set, but it's too expensive. A standard volumetric flask would be a good idea. Professor Sprout, Professor Sinistra, Madam Hooch, Professor Binns, Madam Pants. Finally, Quirrell. Guan Qiong scratched his head. Honestly, he didn't want to give a Quirrell anything, but if he gave gifts to all the professors but not him, it would make Guan Qiong stand out. It would be bad if Voldemort remembered him. A cross pendant would be fine. Guan Qiong thought of one at random. Then came the students' gifts. Harry, a chocolate frog. Ron, Pidgeot every flavor beans. Seamus, exploding candy. Neville, the licorice wand. The rest of Lavender, Dean, Parvati, etc. also choose a snack each. I believe they will like it. Although there is not much social interaction in daily life, as students of the academy, the relationship is still okay. Guan Qiong is not an arrogant person, at most she is taciturn. The relationship is not close, but it can be regarded as an ordinary classmate. Unconsciously, I have met quite a few people. At this time, Guan Qiong has arrived in front of Hagrid's hut. By the way, there is also Hagrid's gift, a guide to raising fire dragons. I believe it will be useful. Guan Qiong knocked on the door, and a voice came from inside. Finally, there is a gift for little Hermione. What should I give her? Today, the word count has exceeded 30,000, and it will be updated in advance. Chapter 16 Christmas. With just a few days left until Christmas, a festive atmosphere quietly enveloped the entire college. Everyone's face was filled with smiles. Half their attention was focused on the lectures, while the other half drifted outside, planning what they would do during the Christmas holidays. The auditorium had been decorated again. Holly and mistletoe festoons adorned the walls, and 12 towering Christmas trees, adorned with icicles and candles, lined the sides. Outside, a heavy snow finally began to fall. Instead of turning to water as it fell to the ground, the cold air condensed all the moisture in the air into snow, creating a refreshing atmosphere. Snow piled on the lawn, and the lake froze solid. After school, students spent their free time playing snowball fights, skating on the lake, and a few enjoyed the warm fire in the lounge. Guan Qiong no longer confined herself to the room of requirement and the library, but ventured outside to enjoy her rare leisure time. Then he saw the Weasley brothers use magic to make snowballs chase Quirrell, finally hitting the back of Quirrell's turbaned head. Gwen's eye twitched. If he remembered correctly, it must have been the face of a Dark Lord. Weasley, we're truly our king, Gwen sighed as he watched the Weasley brothers being punished by the hastily arrived Professor McGonagall. Then he ran to the edge of the icy lake. Hagrid sat nearby, watching the wizards galloping across the lake and drinking from his water skin. Hagrid, two large characters suddenly appeared before Hagrid. Huh? Oh, it's Gwen. Hagrid turned and saw Gwen standing next to him. After he sat down, he was on Gwen's level. I've got what you wanted. It's 3 galleons, 11 sickles, and 22 nuts. 3 sickles went to give those poor owls a treat. They're tired from traveling across the continent in this weather. You don't mind, do you? Hagrid said. Of course. A flash of light flew from Guan Qiong's wand. In his previous life, he had always been troubled by money and exhausted by work, but in this life, things were much easier. After all, he now had enough to feed himself and his family. The income from the Forbidden Forest wouldn't make him rich, but at least it would allow him to not worry about pocket money while at school. He also had other ideas for making money, but they would require a longer vacation to implement. The things are in my shed. You can go get them now. Oh, by the way, Hagrid scratched his head, blinking, and spoke a little embarrassedly. I saw a guide to keeping fire dragons in there. Hey, Qiong, are you interested in fire dragons too? Hagrid grinned, his black beetle-like eyes blinking with joy. He hadn't expected Guan Qiong to share his interests. In all his years at school, this was the first time he had encountered such a hobby. That's a Christmas present for you, Guan Qiong said. But I do have some interest in dragons. You think they were cute, too, don't you? Hagrid's voice rose, then fell. It's a pity that private dragon keeping isn't allowed now. This book is just for reading, not for use. Guan Qiong patted the large creature on the shoulder. There will be a chance, he said, and walked towards Hagrid's hut. Leaving Hagrid alone by the lake, imagining the possibility of raising dragons, a chuckle escaping from his lips from time to time. Hermione wrote furiously on her holiday homework while giving them instructions. Keep searching while I'm gone. And owl me if you find any information about Nicholas Flamel. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance and nodded. Don't be idle at home, either. Ask your parents, Ron said. Hermione glanced at him, closed the workbook in front of her, and breathed a sigh of relief. She had finished all the Christmas homework assigned by her professors. Who says I'm idle at home? I don't always play when I get home. Harry looked at the homework Hermione stuffed into her bag and asked tentatively, so what are you doing? Finish my Hogwarts homework first, so I don't have to worry about not having it when I go home for cram school, Hermione said. Amidst the two people's jaws dropped, Hermione added, I can't neglect my regular studies. I don't want to graduate from Hogwarts without knowing how to use a computer. What is the computer? Ron asked Harry. I've only heard of it. It's a very complicated machine. It has. Harry recalled the information he had seen briefly on TV. Software, hardware and other things, Harry said hesitantly, unsure. What are those software and hardware? Ron asked. These were two words he had never heard of before and couldn't understand at all. That's right. Harry scratched his head and looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at them both as if they were idiots, sighed heavily, and prepared to put her homework back in her dormitory. She gave up trying to explain these things to them. Magic had already overwhelmed their tiny brains. Trying to process any more human worldly matters would have froze them. Yet, froze, a word borrowed from computer, Hermione thought, and then her thoughts drifted to more places. Guan Qiong, did he know about these things? He was from an orphanage, so he probably didn't. She was better than him in that respect, but she wasn't gloating about it. She wouldn't compare herself to Guan Qiong in such a situation. It wasn't fair. By the time she emerged from the dormitory, Ron was already playing wizard's chess with Guan Qiong. Harry was watching, apparently having just lost. HMPH, at Guan Qiong's gaze, Hermione snorted softly and sprinted out of the common room. She still had a little time. She was going to go to the library and read some more, looking for information on Nicholas Flamel. Looks like it's holiday time, and she's giving you some too, Guan Qiong said, her one flashing with light, a smile on her face. No way, she just told us to keep looking during the holiday, Ron grumbled, ordering the chess players to move. Joan, do you know who Nicholas Flamel is? Harry suddenly asked from the side. Of course I do, Guan Qiong said. Seeing their eyes light up, he added, are you sure you want to hear me out? Harry and Ron remembered what Hermione had said before. If they asked Guan Qiong, they wouldn't have to check their homework anymore. And as third parties, they saw clearly that Hermione and Guan Qiong were just having a little temper, but if they sided with Guan Qiong, then Hermione and them would be completely cut off. Although only 12 years old, Harry, who had always slept at the bottom of the stairs, and Ron, who had 5 older brothers, understood interpersonal relationships better than the average young wizard and saw things more clearly. No, they both shook their heads and lowered their heads to look at the chess pieces. Guan Qiong smiled and said nothing more, continuing to trade pieces with Ron until only the king and queen were left on the board. Chapter 17 A Bumper Harvest of Christmas Gifts. Christmas arrived as promised, and the atmosphere throughout the school reached a fever pitch. Guan Qiong was awakened by their cheers. Harry and Ron had already begun unwrapping the presents. Harry was visibly happier. Up until then, he hadn't expected to receive any gifts. Merry Christmas, June, Harry said. Come open your presents. You've got so many. It feels like more than Ron and I have combined. Guan Qiong yawned, got dressed, and came to his presents. It was indeed a lot, beyond his imagination, more than he had ever given away. Scratching his head, Guan Qiong began to unwrap his Christmas presents. Thinking about it, it seemed like the first time he had received a gift from anyone. In his previous life, where people lived, affection was too reserved. Only lovers exchanged gifts, even family members rarely gave more. Sitting amidst the gifts that practically covered him, Guan Qiong felt a deep sense of joy. What a wonderful feeling. Guan Qiong took a deep breath, his tired spirit now perked up. Let's see what I can get. Guan Qiong first picked up a gift wrapped like a book. A note on the top read Dumbledore's name. Below it was a message. May you reach the mountains, rivers, and seas you see. Just as Guan Qiong was about to unwrap it, Another line of words appeared beneath it. Thank you very much for the wool socks. I've never received anything so warm. They seem to come from the east. The words appeared very abruptly. Even when Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective, he couldn't detect a trace of magic, let alone a magical circuit. Could this be Dumbledore's response to the gift, or perhaps an automatic reply? Guan Qiong wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. He unwrapped it and found a travel guide listing famous tourist destinations on Earth, both magical and non-magical. It was quite nice, exactly what he was looking for. Guan Qiong happily set it aside and began to unwrap the second gift. It was from Professor McGonagall, a piece of Play-Doh. Guan Qiong looked at the blackened Play-Doh in his hands and scratched his head. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall had left a note. 100-phase mud, made from rare shapeshifters, has a better compatibility with transfiguration. I hope it will help you with your transfiguration. Guan Qiong tried it and found that, as expected, its own magic circuits were very flexible and easy to cover. Moreover, if the second layer of transfiguration magic circuits was incomplete, it would automatically fill in with its own magic circuits. Excellent stuff. This must have been a rare material Professor McGonagall had found specifically for him, fearing he would fall behind in transfiguration class. With this, he would be able to understand and build magic circuits more quickly when practicing transfiguration. Combined with his natural talent, it was simply perfect. Guan Qiong had begun to love Christmas. He had been a little skeptical before, but now, all he could say was, "It's amazing." Next up was Professor Flitwick's book on Goblin history, probably because he'd heard he preferred history books. Guan Qiong flipped through it briefly, finding a few details about Goblin magic, but not much, and all superficial, probably just for illustration. Professor Snape's gift was a potion called Thought Whisper, supposedly capable of releasing thoughts without speaking. The note he left behind said he had more if needed, but it would require payment. Professor Sprout's gift was a leaf, which, when held under the tongue, could enhance alertness and improve reading efficiency, though it could only be used a few times. Professor Sinister gave him a globe, perhaps having learned of his travels. Hagrid's gift was a book, A History of Dragons in Britain and Ireland, which Guan Qiong had probably bought himself but couldn't finish. Guan Qiong examined it and found it had aged exteriors, but the interior was pristine, reminiscent of the books he had read at university in his previous life. Madame Hooch's gift was a small, resonant bagpipe. Professor Binns also gave him a book, The Development of Magic in Ancient Times and the Evolution of Human Relationships, as thick as 3 city wall bricks. Guan Qiong glanced at the price tag on the back of the book and hoped the university's monthly reemployment subsidy and rehire salary for Professor Binns would be higher. This one book was worth his entire fortune. Guan Qiong placed the book by his bed and moved away another book, only half the thickness of a city wall brick. This would be his bedtime reading for the entire school year. He then looked through his own gifts and didn't find Quirrell's. Although he had known this would happen, he still felt a little sorry. After all the professors had given gifts, and missing one was a bit of a pain in the ass. But thinking of Quirrell's current state, he stopped worrying. What if Quirrell got carried away and sent Voldemort's soul here, claiming there was a body of exceptional talent? He would be completely lost. The only things left around were gifts from young wizards, Harry, Ron, Neville, Seamus, and others. What Guan Qiong didn't expect was that quite a few were from girls from other houses, probably between first and third years. Most of the gifts were chocolates, with notes saying things like "Let's make friends." The most outrageous one was from a third-year girl, also from Gryffindor, who wrote, "Senior will be waiting for you on the 5th floor tonight." Hiss, this is illegal. Guan Qiong shuddered, and with a trembling hand, she threw the chocolate onto Ron's bed. Under Ron's puzzled gaze, Guan Qiong quickly typed a line of words with her wand. "Here's to you. This brand seems quite delicious." Ron didn't think there was anything wrong. Usually, Guan Qiong would buy some snacks to share with everyone. Guan Qiong was a person who liked to share, and she was also very kind. This was Ron's impression of Guan Qiong. Putting the chocolates aside, Guan Qiong looked at the last gift. It was from Hermione, and it was also a book, The Adventures of the Dragon Man, about 1/3 the thickness of a city wall brick. He had actually read this book before, as a novel for entertainment, and it was he who recommended it to Hermione. It tells the fantasy adventure story of a young wizard and a dragon that transformed into human, full of a certain sense of imagination. Because the magical creatures in this world cannot become human, Guan Qiong opened the book and found the middle part. He remembered the story there. Midway through their adventure, the dragon and the human encountered a group of evil wizards. The dragon, sensing their presence, warned the human, but they refused to believe him. Ultimately, they were ambushed, burdened with a heavy responsibility, and nearly failed their mission. You should have trusted me. We're friends, the dragon, now in its true form, said to the human at the foot of a cliff. Okay, it's my fault. I was too stubborn, the human apologized. Chapter 18, The Deathly Hallows from a Magical Perspective. This little girl. Guan Qiong smiled inwardly, understanding what Hermione meant. However, the entire plot of the Philosopher's Stone was in his head. He knew Snape better than anyone else, so of course he knew what was going on. And Quirrell, who they had always ignored, was the real villain, carrying Voldemort's soul within him. So, he simply put the book aside, unconcerned. By the end of the school year, Hermione would understand. Until then, he didn't mind enduring the little girl's temper. Hey, June, look at this. It's a Christmas present from your mom, Ron suddenly called out. Guan Qiong looked over. Ron was holding a thick, sky blue, hand-knitted sweater, and next to it, a large box of homemade fudge. Next to him, Harry was already wearing a bright green sweater made by the same person, and he was also holding fudge. My mom heard about you in the newspaper a while ago. You know, there was a bit of a commotion when you started school. Harry has one too, Ron explained. He also had a sweater, but it was a dark burgundy. Guan Qiong took the sweater in his hands. It felt wonderful, soft, like cotton, and looked incredibly warm. Thank your mother for me, she's such a kind person. Guan Qiong pulled it on. It was indeed incredibly warm, making him feel like he could roll around in the snow outside and still not feel cold. Yes, Mrs. Weasley is such a kind person, Harry agreed. He had never received such a wonderful gift before. His previous clothes were Dudley's leftovers, big, torn, and greasy. But at least they had given him a gift this year, even if it was just a 50-pence piece. I'm glad you like it, Ron said, blushing slightly, but delighted. They had mostly unpacked their presents, leaving only Harry's final wrapping. Harry took it in his hands. It felt so light, like air. Guan Qiong looked over. If he remembered correctly, this was the most valuable item in the batch, one of the world's most valuable props, the Deathly Hallows, the invisibility cloak. Harry opened the paper package, and a silvery gray substance, like water, trickled down to the floor, forming a shimmering mass. Guan Qiong activated her magical vision. She saw nothing, as if it were just an ordinary piece of cloth, devoid of any magical circuits. Ron, standing beside her, seemed to recognize the item and gasped. Harry looked at him. Ron lowered his voice, speaking between the three of them. I've heard of this thing. If I'm right, it's an invisibility cloak. It's extremely rare and valuable. Guan Qiong remained non-committal. Ron was probably talking about an ordinary invisibility cloak, but this one was beyond rare and valuable. There was only one in the world, a gift from the gods. Harry picked up the shimmering silver fabric. It felt like water, and he had to grip it carefully to prevent it from slipping back onto the floor. Try it on, Guan Qiong's one word, her eyes fixed on the cloak. There was indeed no visible magical circuitry, not even a hint of magic. He could see the life circuit in Harry's hand through the invisibility cloak. Harry draped the cloak over himself, revealing only his head, like an Arab. Ron gasped, and Guan Qiong's eyes fixed on Harry. It vanished, Harry's body vanished, leaving only his head suspended in midair. And from Guan Qiong's perspective, the life circuits he could observe vanished the moment the invisibility cloak closed around him, as if nothing had been there. Try taking a few steps, Guan Qiong said. Harry did as he was told, pacing the dormitory. The scene became eerie, like a flying head dangling in midair, searching for prey. Guan Qiong stared at Harry's body, his eyes growing deeper and taking on a faint silver glow, like moonlight shining into his eyes. Qiong, what's wrong? Harry asked. Guan Qiong's gaze was piercing, like Snape's constant gaze on him, as if he wanted to see through his entire body, right into his soul. It's okay. Guan Qiong closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and slowly opened them again. Why don't you cover your head too? It's scary like this, he said. Really? Harry looked at his vanishing lower body and nodded in agreement. He pulled the invisibility cloak over his head, covering his entire body. Harry had completely vanished from Guan Qiong and Ron. Guan Qiong and Ron were the only two left in the dormitory. Neither spoke, and the atmosphere seemed to have subtly shifted. "Harry, are you there?" Ron whispered, looking around warily. Guan Qiong turned his head, as if following the movement of something. "I'm here." With a start, Harry suddenly appeared from Ron's side, hugged him, and they both fell to the ground. Guan Qiong took 2 steps back, avoiding the tumbling bodies. "I knew it, you just wanted to scare me." "How nasty, Harry." Ron pulled Harry, and the two of them laughed and played. Gwen shook her head, picked up the invisibility cloak Harry had dropped, and held it in her hand. It was indeed slippery, like holding a wet loach. Gwen draped the invisibility cloak over her hand, and his entire right hand vanished. He could still see the magical circuits, but when she wrapped the invisibility cloak around his right hand, the vital circuits disappeared. His right hand vanished completely from his view, both from normal and magical perspectives. "What's wrong, Gwen? Is there a problem?" Harry and Ron, each undecided, climbed to their feet. "Nothing, just curious." "Here's a note tucked inside." Gwen pulled a letter from the invisibility cloak and handed it to Harry. Harry took the note. Written in a thin, circular handwriting, it read, "Your father left this to me before he died. It should now be returned to you. Use it well. Sincerely, Merry Christmas." There was no signature, no other message. "Who could have sent this?" "A friend of your father's," Ron asked. "I don't know," Harry said. "You know, I don't remember them." "Oh, sorry," Ron apologized, but Harry just shook his head. "It's nothing, I'm used to it." Harry took the invisibility cloak that Guan Qiong handed back to him and asked doubtfully, "Zhuang, can you see me under the cloak? You were staring at me just now, so I attacked Ron." Guan Qiong shook her head, smiling and pointing to the mess of unwrapped gift wrapping and ribbons on the ground. Harry looked at the things on the ground and suddenly realized what was going on. Watching Harry explain to Ron, Guan Qiong began to pick up the things on the ground. With a flick of her wand, all the unwanted garbage levitated and then, under Guan Qiong's control, gathered towards the center. Just now, when Harry moved under the invisibility cloak, the hem of the cloak obscured the things on the ground, revealing his position. But Guan Qiong didn't rely on this method. He had directly seen Harry moving. Chapter 19 Hermione's True Thoughts. It's simple to explain. As a deathly halo, the invisibility cloak is indeed incredibly powerful. It possesses no inherent magic or magical circuits, and when closed, it can even block the magical circuits of other objects. However, there's a problem. When it renders an object invisible, it acquires a shape, rather than a simple sheet of cloth. When it moves, the surrounding air is pushed aside, forming a convex cavity. Guan Qiong, of course, can't see the changes in the air, but he can see the magic. When Harry moved with the invisibility cloak on, the magic, which had been moving slowly like dust, suddenly shifted, as if being pushed aside. Because the magic was squeezed onto the surface of the shape, it became denser and brighter than elsewhere. This was how Guan Qiong saw Harry wearing the invisibility cloak, not by looking directly at the cloak itself, but by its effect. Of course, there was no need to share this with Harry and Ron. After opening the presents, the three of them had a quick breakfast in the dining room before wandering around Hogwarts Castle. Guan Qiong also took a break, no longer confined to the room of requirement or the library. Instead, they followed Ron and Harry around the castle. With no destination in mind, no definite plans, they simply wandered aimlessly, feeling incredibly happy and relaxed. As for Nicholas Flamel, whom Hermione had asked them to investigate, they had already forgotten all about him. Now, they were only thinking about the Christmas feast that evening. Afternoon, tired of wandering around, they returned to the Gryffindor common room, where the warm fireplace still burned, and began to relax. Harry and Ron played wizard chess, while Guan Qiong read a wizarding adventure novel. Ron's chess piece was old and tattered, but it was very obedient, following his orders and talking a lot, mostly giving Ron advice. Harry's chess piece was Guan Qiong's, new and obedient, but it put Harry under a sense of pressure. Because they didn't speak at all, like ordinary chess pieces, only speaking in low, solemn tones before their deaths. "This is a wrong choice, this move is wrong, I hope my death is useful." Then, they calmly faced the attacks of the opposing pieces before being dragged off the field. There was no grand theatricality or death cries of terror, only calmness. And this calmness frightened Harry deeply. He felt like a true king, sending his soldiers to their deaths. If he lost, all those lives would be in vain. Ron, on the other hand, seemed unusually relaxed, even having the energy to chat with Gwen, who was reading a book nearby. "Gwen, when are you going to make up with Hermione? You've been at odds for almost a month now," Ron said. "She's mad at me." Gwen didn't move, but placed her left hand on her wand, and dots of light flew out to form words. "But she and I saw Snape cast the spell on Harry." "We saw it with our own eyes," Ron said, his voice rising. Gwen glanced up at him, then lowered her head again. "What you see isn't necessarily true. What did you write about in your history of magic essay?" "I wrote about safety and hygiene." "If you don't, you could get an infectious disease," Harry muttered, lowering his head in shame. "I wrote about communication." If they had explained things clearly, this wouldn't have happened. Compared to Harry, Ron faced his assignment head-on, his tone confident. Guan Qiong shook his head helplessly. "As expected. There are 1,000 hamlets in 1,000 people. But things have their priorities, and people have their priorities. The key for the heir's empire should be not to be misled by superficial things, otherwise it can easily lead to negative consequences." Therefore, his essay received an A+, Hermione got an A, Ron got a B, and Harry got a pitiful C. "I don't think Hermione and you are angry about this," Harry said suddenly. Guan Qiong looked over. "She's probably angry that you didn't believe her. Look, you and her are good friends, and you saved her. You should be on her side." Harry tried to express his point. "She thought you should trust her, but you didn't, so she's angry." "Yes, and Hermione and I saw it with our own eyes. Snape is definitely a bad guy. He just wants to harm Harry. I heard he used to be with you-know-who." "I heard it from my dad," Ron added. Guan Qiong looked at the novel in front of him, his eyes not focused on the words. He seemed to have missed something. Guan Qiong suddenly stood up and waved his wand. The chess pieces in front of Harry floated up and down, helping him avoid a trap. "That's a very clever move," the chess pieces praised, but Guan Qiong was already walking towards the dormitory, walking much faster than usual. "What's wrong with him?" Harry asked in confusion. "Who knows?" Ron shrugged, controlling the movement of the chess pieces, surrounding Harry's piece again. Harry, unwilling to give up, launched a rescue operation, and the chess pieces on both sides began to fight. Guan Qiong arrived at the dormitory, threw the novel on the bed, and then flipped through the books he had sorted, finding the one Hermione had given him. He should have thought of this earlier, but his preoccupation with teaching Hermione had blinded him. He flipped open the Adventures of the Dragonman and found the last few chapters. The adventure between man and dragon had reached its final destination. The kingdom of Ryan had invaded the kingdom of Parsis. To resist the invasion, the king of Parsis had decided to invoke the power of the devil. This would lead to a demonic invasion of the world, devastating all life. Man and Dragon's final mission was to prevent King Parsis from completing the final ritual magic circle and slay the kingdom of Parsis. He already harbored the seed of the devil's power within him, becoming the coordinates of the demonic realm. This was a daunting task, not only because King Parsis was powerful, but also because he was a good man who simply wanted to protect his people from invasion. But to protect the world, he must die. "You shouldn't have come with me. This isn't a just act," the man said to the dragon. He was torn and sad, but for the sake of the world, he had to do it. "Oh, I'm so sad. Aren't we friends?" the dragon said to the man. "I don't care whether this action is just or evil. I only know that you are my friend, and friends must stand together, even if I'm wrong." "What I did is wrong?" the man asked. "Yes, right or wrong doesn't matter. As long as we stand together, that's enough. If you ask me to leave, I'll be angry," the dragon replied. Thus, the man and the dragon began this unjust action, killing the king of Parsis. They also sacrificed their lives in the subsequent Battle of Parsis, protecting the kingdom of Parsis from destruction. The book ends. Guan Qiong closed the book, realizing that this was what Hermione wanted him to see. She was angry with Guan Qiong not because Guan Qiong believed Snape, but because Guan Qiong did not stand with her. Even if she was truly wrong, Guan Qiong should have been wrong with her, not against her. After all, they were friends. Chapter 20, Adventurous Bloodline Awakening. The Christmas feast that evening was a riot of activity. The table was overflowing with food. The turkey was enormous, as thick as Guan Qiong's waist. The roast meat and potatoes piled high, leaving no end to the feast. Unlimited sausages and peas, paired with a rich gravy and cranberry sauce, were simply delicious. A multitude of wizarding firecrackers exploded with a resounding boom, as if someone had set off firecrackers from the dining chairs, only instead of blue smoke. Countless gifts burst forth from the firecrackers: balloons, wizard chess pieces, hats, and even strange contraptions. Professors and students were all at peace, singing and dancing throughout this wonderful evening. Professor Dumbledore, having traded his usual wizard hat for a bonnet topped with flowers, wore a cheerful smile, appearing incredibly approachable. Even the usually solemn Professor McGonagall chuckled, her tall black top hat tilted to one side, her eyes curved like the moonlight outside. Everyone was immersed in the festive atmosphere, including Guan Qiong. He waved his wand, and countless points of light shot out, forming a giant Merry Christmas. As he controlled it, the words grew brighter than the lights, flickering like dancing lights in a disco. Everyone cheered and sang. The food was plentiful, and after dinner, desserts like Christmas pudding, Christmas cake, and pudding with wine jam followed. Everyone ate until they could no longer hold their appetite. Spirits were high, then endlessly exhausted, as the students returned to their dormitories to rest. This was Guan Qiong's most joyful Christmas. He had never experienced such a rich festive atmosphere. It was completely different from the East, but it wasn't bad, at least he thought. It was also Harry's most joyful Christmas. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but he didn't want to sleep. One thing lingered in his mind: the invisibility cloak, and the person who had given it to him. He took the cloak in his hands, feeling the fabric's impossibly smooth and lightness, like a free wind brushing against his hand. Freedom? Harry shuddered, remembering the words on the note. Use it wisely. He stood, pulled the invisibility cloak over himself, and looked into the mirror. His reflection was invisible. The moonlight shone across his spot, unwavering. Yes, with the invisibility cloak on, he was free. No one, not even Filch, could detect him. He could go anywhere in Hogwarts. A breeze of freedom blew through his veins, his father's adventurous blood awakening within him. The coolness of the invisibility cloak didn't calm him, but instead made him feel like he was right there with his father. This was something his father had left him, something that allowed him to adventure freely and undetected. Harry felt a surge of excitement, striding out. He didn't call out to Ron. Ron was exhausted today, so he should rest. He didn't call out to Gwen either. To be honest, being with Gwen always felt a sense of pressure, like an adult standing over him. Gwen opened her eyes in bed, looking out at the empty dormitory. A faint silver light filled her eyes, allowing her to see Harry's retreating figure. But he remained silent, and had no intention of using the invisibility cloak with Harry for a nighttime tour of Hogwarts. He was simply too exhausted. Overexerting himself physically and mentally at this hour would only affect his physical development. Besides, a nighttime tour wasn't very exciting. He preferred sleep to wandering the empty castle alone. With a yawn so vast it could encompass the entire world, Guan Qiong closed his eyes, and in a matter of moments, he fell into deep sleep. Meanwhile, Harry descended the stairs, crossed a common room, and crawled out of the Gryffindor common room into the corridor. "Who is that?" a gruff voice called out from the painting. The fat lady's portrait couldn't see him, so she could only question him in confusion, but Harry didn't respond. He headed towards the library. Unsure what to do, he decided to head to the restricted section to search for information on Nicholas Flamel and find out who he was. But he had underestimated the extent of the restricted section. Countless books on the dark arts were hidden there, many of which, just the sight of their titles or covers, sent chills down his spine, sending shivers down his spine, and faint whispers drifted into his ears. He could only choose one book that looked okay, but the moment he opened it, it let out a loud scream, which continued even after he closed it. The footsteps seemed to appear suddenly, and Filch, displaying his incredible speed, reached the corridor outside the library in a matter of seconds. Harry could only flee frantically, cloaked in invisibility cloak, but there was always a way out. He found a room to hide in. It seemed to be an abandoned classroom, with desks and chairs stacked against the wall and an upside-down wastepaper basket on the other side. In the center of the room stood an imposing mirror, reaching all the way to the ceiling. Its ornate gold frame rested on two claw-like feet. There was a line of writing engraved on the top of the mirror, but Harry couldn't make out the meaning. Strange. Who put this mirror there? Confused, Harry walked over to it. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat, his breathing quickened. Not even when Filch was chasing him had he felt this intense. He stared intently at the view in the mirror. "So you saw your parents?" In a mirror, Ron asked Harry during breakfast. Guan Qiong, beside him, was smearing sausage with chili sauce while listening to Harry and Ron's conversation. He remembered the plot, the mirror of Erised, a mirror that could reveal a person's inner desires. So, perhaps going with Harry yesterday wouldn't have been a bad idea. He could see what he looked like in the mirror of Erised, and also see the magical circuits within it. While there was a high probability he wouldn't understand, it was still interesting to see. Yes, it was a very strange mirror, and there was something on it that I couldn't understand, Harry said. He looked at Guan Qiong, wanting to ask if she knew what it meant. Guan Qiong thought about it. He had forgotten that detail. After all, he hadn't memorized the entire book, but he still knew the general meaning. I guess it means it can show a person what they most want to see, Guan Qiong said, a flash of light flying out of her wand. Is that so? Harry nodded. Then what can I see if I go? Ron asked curiously. You can come with me tonight, Ron. It's a great mirror. You'll definitely think so once you see it, Harry suggested. Ron was tempted. He turned to look at Guan Qiong, wanting to ask if he wanted to go with him. No, I prefer to sleep at night. Guan Qiong declined their invitation. It wasn't for any other reason, but mainly because he was afraid that the mirror would reflect something else, such as his past life. Although he thought it was unlikely. He didn't like working overtime. And he could guarantee that Dumbledore must have been staring at the mirror, and he could tell what was in the mirror. Okay, let's go then. Ron and Harry agreed to go to the room together tonight to take a look. Chapter 21 Spell Progress 1. Harry and Ron visited the Mirror of Erised. While Harry saw his parents, Ron saw himself surrounded by his brothers, having become captain of the Quidditch team, prefect, and head boy. He had 5 older brothers, each of whom was exceptionally talented. Even George and Fred, often considered troublemakers, achieved top grades every year and were well liked for their lively personalities. As their younger brother, Ron faced immense pressure. Coupled with his family's poverty, he felt a desire to prove himself, yet also felt a sense of inferiority, believing he could never achieve anything. When he first became friends with Harry, it was because of a friend like Harry that he felt he had something special. Having a special friend is a special thing, and of course, they eventually became true friends. Ron had always felt inferior, unable to match Gwen and Hermione's grades, and unable to match Harry in other areas, such as Quidditch. Harry had made the Gryffindor team as Seeker in his first year. But when faced with the Mirror of Erised, he demonstrated a stronger character than Harry. He was the first to struggle free from the Mirror of Erised's illusions, realizing they were merely illusions, devoid of practical use. Yet, Harry remained captivated by the visions it depicted, relentlessly checking them out every night. He couldn't be blamed, though. While Ron saw his own success, Harry saw his parents, whom he had never met. How could one not be addicted? Guan Qiong watched Harry go out again and again, returning only after midnight. Finally, it was Dumbledore's intervention that secured Harry's absence until the final days of Christmas break. Of course, he couldn't find the mirror even when he went, as Dumbledore had moved it to a safekeeping location, a location only Guan Qiong knew. Guan Qiong, of course, wouldn't tell Harry or Ron. In fact, he hadn't paid any attention to their well-being during this time. He immersed himself entirely in books and spells, reading nearly as many books as he did himself, and mastering even the softening charm. The softening spell's effect is to soften an object. To put it more scientifically, it's similar to making a rigid body flexible. If the effect is strong enough, it's possible to transform a wooden stick into a whip. However, most magicians only use it superficially, similar to softening the ground to prevent falling objects or people from being injured. To Guan Qiong, the magical circuits of the softening spell appear as a constantly undulating line, like the ebb and flow of ocean waves. This is why it took him so long to master it. When using the softening spell, he must constantly control the wavy circuits of magic power, otherwise they will be ineffective. The length and height of the waves determine the softening spell's effectiveness. In the room of requirement, Guan Qiong controlled a wooden stick to fly overhead, then released it. Gravity pulled the stick towards him, and he immediately swung his wand, creating a wavy circuit of magic power that acted on the stick. The stick landed on his head, becoming as pliable as noodles. The force of gravity caused its ends to swing sideways, but it did no harm. He set the stick aside, took out his notebook, and opened it with the unlocking charm. He first used a quill to tick the end of the softening charm, then drew a wavy pattern of magical circuits, and wrote down the possible locations below. An object with a certain amount of force and speed. 1. Unlikely, to be tested. Food, unlikely, to be tested. Hair, possible, protective spell. Then, he turned his gaze to the final spell of his first year, the fire charm. Shaking his head and calculating the time in his mind, he cast a restoration charm before the fire charm, then closed the notebook and locked it with a locking charm. By then, the holidays were over, and the school was returning to normal life. Hermione had returned from her home. When she heard what Harry and Ron had done during the Christmas break, her first reaction was disbelief. Are you crazy? Especially you, Harry. Do you know how many points Gryffindor will lose if Filch catches us? Hermione said angrily. I know I was wrong, Hermione, Harry admitted. After a while without the mirror of Eris, his mind began to clear, no longer blinded by his previous stubbornness. Hermione snorted, but said nothing more. She knew Harry's background. The mirror had shown him his parents, and it was indeed easy to become addicted. She rolled her eyes, glanced around, and whispered to the two, that person, did he go with you? What did he see, that person? Ron asked, confused. Is it Joan? He didn't go with us. He didn't seem interested in the mirror, Harry said. Why do you say Joan is that person? I almost thought it meant he who must not be named. It scared me, Ron said. Hermione just glanced at him without explaining. If it was Joan, I think he would see an entire library of books, all history books, Ron speculated. I think Joan will see him and go straight back to ancient times, like in some novels, Harry thought. Okay, forget about him. Hermione dropped the subject and turned to her most pressing concern. Did you find any information about Nicholas Flamel? Don't tell me you haven't read a single book this whole holiday. Harry looked down at his feet, while Ron glanced around, not wanting to meet Hermione's growing disappointment. Okay, I knew you were unreliable. Asking you to read a book during the holiday is like expecting a troll to do math. Hermione clutched her forehead. Suddenly, she thought of Guan Qiong. If it was Guan Qiong, she'd surely have the information she needed the moment she heard the name. Just ask Joan, Ron muttered, but he gave way before Hermione's gaze. The pressure was upon Harry and Ron once again. They knew their relaxing holiday life was gone, and they were back to digging through that damn thick, heavy book, searching for Nicholas Flamel's name. Harry felt a terrible headache because he clearly remembered that he had heard this name, but he had forgotten where he was. This state made him extremely uncomfortable, and he couldn't even concentrate in class. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Strange Quirrell. Please, Guan Qiong, answer this question, a stuttering voice echoed, and a brief silence fell in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, even the dust hanging in the air. Half the students turned their gazes to Guan Qiong, while the other half looked at Quirrell at the podium. Quirrell's body was shaking constantly, his face pale and tense, as if he were about to faint. Behind him was a magically enlarged picture describing a mysterious eastern creature called the human-faced boil. This was a last-minute addition he had made. It wasn't in the dark arts, a guide to self-defense. He had just explained the strange nature of this mysterious creature. It grew from human bodies, had human faces, could speak, and some could even eat. In the end, without exception, those who developed the human-faced boil died. Quirrell's question was, what should one do in such a situation? Guan Qiong stood up, frowning slightly. There was nothing wrong with a teacher asking students to answer questions, especially since he had Eastern blood. The only problem was that he was aphasic and could not speak. So, no teacher in any class ever asked him to answer a question, including Professor Snape, who loved to trouble Gryffindor the most, and Professor Binns, who favored him the most. It was like asking a cripple to run a 100-meter race. Guan Qiong looked at the shaking Quirrell, wondering if he was the only one who had given a Christmas present since no one else had, and that was why he was remembered. But no matter what, Quirrell was still a professor, and he had to answer questions. Quirrell looked at Guan Qiong with hope and a hint of fear in his eyes. Cold sweat continued to form, and he had to cover his head with a handkerchief. Guan Qiong thought, it was nothing more than burns, knives, medication, and injections. If these didn't work, then he would have to. As he was thinking, Quirrell's face suddenly changed. With a sharp wave of his wand, the copy of Dark Arts, a guide to self-defense in front of everyone was turned to the same page, right after his last lecture. And the words on the picture behind him quickly disappeared, and other content appeared, which exactly corresponded to the content that was supposed to be covered in class today. How to deal with cuckoo rats. Guan Qiong, you please sit down first. I will continue today's lesson, Quirrell stuttered. Guan Qiong sat down, bewildered. The other students were also confused, not understanding what Quirrell was doing. But Quirrell had so many strange things about him that this one incident wasn't surprising. In comparison, his perpetually turban headband and the lingering smell of garlic were even more memorable. Cuckoo C. The cuckoo rat is a common, mystical creature. Its body is not much different from an ordinary mouse, except for the dove-like feathers on the sides of its arms. And the sound it makes is not a squeak, but a cuckoo, hence the name cuckoo rat. The cuckoo rat's teeth contain a toxin that was once an ingredient in amnesia potions, but has since been discontinued. While its harm is minimal, it can sometimes have serious consequences. A bite can cause a person's memory to erode, leading to persistent forgetfulness and other consequences. The most dangerous scenario involves someone who forgets the bite and fails to take medication promptly, ultimately causing their memory to completely shatter and becoming vegetative. This often takes a long time. In one such case, a man bitten by a bitten person ventured deep into the mountains, lost track of his way, and spent 5 years trying to escape. Upon escaping, he had forgotten almost everything except his name. Fortunately, after taking the antidote, his memory was restored. While Guan Qiong finished reading all about the cuckoo rat and memorizing the herbs that could be scented to repel it, Quirrell on the podium continued to mumble, having only finished about a third of the way through. Guan Qiong scratched his head in frustration. In other classes, when he was bored, he could use his magical vision to look around, sometimes even seeing some interesting or beautiful magical circuits. But not on defense against the dark arts. Behind Quirrell's head was Voldemort's soul, and he didn't want Voldemort to notice him and look back. As for Quirrell's strange behavior just now, Guan Qiong could understand some of it. It was simply using the human-faced sort to hint that he had a similar thing in his body. But Guan Qiong was no good person, and neither was Quirrell. He had previously attacked Harry and tried to kill him. Guan Qiong didn't tell Dumbledore directly, preferring to keep a low profile and avoid Voldemort's attention. Of course, he couldn't possibly be thinking of helping Quirrell separate Voldemort and save him. So Quirrell's behavior just now was nothing more than flirting with a blind man, completely ineffective. The class ended quickly, and Quirrell left in a hurry. The students gathered in groups of 2 or 3, discussing what to do next. Hermione put away the things on her desk, quills, textbooks, wands, and a wooden cat-shaped pen holder that stretched lazily, specifically for quills. As she picked up the cat-shaped pen holder, Hermione glanced in Guan Qiong's direction, who happened to be looking the same way. Hermione snorted softly, a hint of disdain on her face, and then put the cat-shaped pen holder in her bag. When Guan Qiong finished packing her things and joined Hermione, the two of them walked out of the classroom together. Professor Quirrell was just so strange. He actually asked you to answer a question, and suddenly he didn't talk about the human-faced sore anymore. What was he trying to say? The two walked side by side towards the next class. Hermione wrinkled her nose and asked in confusion. Who knows? He's always been weird. A flash of light flew out of the wand in Guan Qiong's hand and floated in front of Hermione. Hermione felt the same way. She really didn't understand why the college hired him as a professor. If you were in a Muggle school, such a person would not even be able to obtain a teaching certificate. Does the human-faced sore that Professor Quirrell just mentioned really exist? It's like another person's face growing on one person's body, Hermione asked. Maybe it does, but I'm not sure. You know, I grew up in England and just happened to be of Oriental descent, Guan Qiong replied. Hermione thought about that scene, shuddered, and stopped asking. Chapter 23 The Crux of the Problem. The second school year after Christmas passed peacefully. Guan Qiong and Hermione's relationship returned to normal, thanks to Guan Qiong's Christmas gift for Hermione, a hand-carved kitten pen holder. It took him considerable effort, but magic provided some assistance. Of course, he carved the piece himself, piece by piece, without any magic involved. He simply cast a healing spell with his wand when he made a mistake. With his precise control, it wasn't a difficult task. And with the endless opportunity for trial and error, He, a complete sculptor with no previous experience, carved a kitten in just a few days. The kitten's front legs stretched out, its waist arched, its tail stretched upward, and its tail formed a small circle, perfectly accommodating a quill. As for why he gave her this gift, would he say it was because Miss Granger was as adorable as a cat? Of course, her temperament was also cat-like. Their first meeting after Christmas was in the library. Guan Qiong was reading when Hermione arrived and sat next to him. She took out the kitten pen holder, placed it on the table, and curled her lips. Ugly, Guan Qiong waved her wand, and tiny dots of light flew out, landing on the kitten's body and forming a pair of small wings on its back. Hermione laughed, but she covered her mouth to suppress her laughter and turned to glare at Guan Qiong. This makes it even uglier. Guan Qiong removed the magic, smiled at Hermione, and shrugged. The afternoon sun streamed into the library, and a gentle breeze blew over the two of them, bringing a hint of fatigue. It made them want to stretch. Well, it's not that ugly, Hermione suddenly said with a smile, reaching out her hands and caressing the surface of the kitten with her fingertips. It wasn't smooth, but every surface was carefully treated. And so, the two of them reconciled. Harry and Ron were the happiest of the group. When they saw Guan Qiong and Hermione return to the Gryffindor common room together, they immediately rushed over to ask Guan Qiong about Nicholas Flamel. They were almost driven crazy by the torture. They had read more books in this period than in the first 10 years of their lives combined. Even in his dreams, Ron wondered what Nicholas Flamel was like, and his final dream was of an old man with white hair and a white beard, riding a broom and catching the golden snitch. The next day, he checked out the records of historical Quidditch players, focusing on the older players. This is a revelation from the Quidditch gods. I'm certain Nicholas Flamel is among them, Ron said confidently. So the things Dumbledore hid on the fourth floor are actually Quidditch player signatures, and Nicholas Flamel is his idol, Hermione asked pointedly. It's not impossible, Ron said, but he didn't open the record book again. Figuring it was about time, Guan Qiong was about to tell them about Nicholas Flamel, but Hermione covered his mouth. Guan Qiong looked at Hermione in confusion. He didn't speak with his mouth. Hermione blushed slightly as she lowered her hand. She coughed twice and said, I know you still don't believe Snape would harm Harry. Come with us to the next Quidditch match. He's sure to make another move. Then you can tell Dumbledore to deal with Snape and protect the thing on the fourth floor. Come on, June doesn't like Quidditch, though I can't understand why anyone wouldn't like it, Ron complained. Everyone has their own hobbies, Ron. Just because you like it doesn't mean the whole world does, Harry said. Of course I know, Ron muttered. To their delight, Hermione no longer urged them to search for Nicholas Flamel in those books as thick as city bricks. They could just wait until after the next Quidditch match, and June would tell them. In reality, knowing Nicholas Flamel wouldn't be a big deal. All it took was for Gunter to convince himself that Snape was trying to get through the fourth floor room, retrieve Dumbledore's hidden item, and then kill Harry to demonstrate his loyalty to you-know-who. Then, Gunter could directly warn Dumbledore. Given Gunter's importance to Dumbledore, they believed he would personally arrest Snape and send him to Azkaban. Therefore, the priority now wasn't finding Nicholas Flamel or Dumbledore's hidden item, but proving everything to Gunter. And the best way to do that was to have him witness it firsthand. When they learned that Snape would be refereeing the next Gryffindor vs Hufflepuff match, they realized their opportunity had arrived. Snape will definitely be tempted to take action in the next match. Joan, you must go, Hermione said solemnly to Gunter. Harry and Ron nearby did the same, Harry's expression a mixture of fear and excitement. He considered what might happen to him. Perhaps Snape's curse hurled him from the sky, or some other curse, or even a poisonous potion accidentally spilled on him, leaving him to die in agony. But when he thought about how his sacrifice could bring about Snape's defeat, Dumbledore's vigilance, and the thwarting of you-know-who's comeback, he felt it was all worth it, a feeling of immense honor. Blood boiled within him, threatening to burn through his heart, to let others witness his devotion to justice. Guan Qiong looked at their eyes, Harry's determination, Ron's excitement, and Hermione's righteousness, and felt a stirring in his heart. Often, he imagined them as grown-ups, overlooking the present state, when they were only 11 or 12 years old. Perhaps they acted impulsively, without careful consideration, filled with childlike thoughts and fairy tale fantasies. But wasn't that precisely why they were the protagonists? Even he, unconsciously, was moved by their actions and qualities, wanting to join them in fighting the evil Snape and protecting the Philosopher's Stone. I'll go. Come to think of it, I've never seen a Quidditch match. A light flew out of Guan Qiong's wand. It would be nice to see some wizarding football, otherwise it would be hard to say that you're a wizard when you go out. Great, Harry and Ron cheered, as if they had already won. Hermione's face also broke into a smile. Guan Qiong just smiled and didn't care too much. There was still a week left before the Quidditch match. During this time, the trio's spirits were very high, as if they had already seen Snape being caught and Dumbledore praising their intelligence and bravery. Even the matter of Nicholas Flamel was temporarily put aside by them. After all, as long as Snape was caught, no matter what the thing was, they would be safe. Chapter 24 Quidditch Day. Until the day before the match, something unexpected happened. Neville stumbled into the Gryffindor common room, his legs glued together, clearly under a leg-locking curse. Hermione removed the curse, and Harry comforted Neville with a chocolate frog. From Neville, they learned the cause of the trouble. Sure enough, it was that pesky Malfoy, who had used Neville as a test subject to practice his spells. Malfoy is truly despicable, Neville. Go find Professor McGonagall and complain to him, Hermione said angrily. Neville simply lowered his head and sobbed, not answering. Neville, be brave. You're a Gryffindor, Ron encouraged. I feel the same way. I feel like I don't deserve to be a Gryffindor. Neville choked back tears as he unwrapped the chocolate frog and handed the picture inside to Harry. Thank you, Harry. I want to go to bed, he said, head bowed, not wanting to meet anyone's gaze, as he ran towards the dormitories. All right, Harry and the others said, not wanting to force anything. After Neville left, Harry looked at the picture of the famous wizard. Dumbledore again. I already have 7, he began, his eyes suddenly widening as he stared at the old man with a long beard and white hair on the picture. When Guan Qiong returned to the Gryffindor common room, Hermione pulled him directly to Harry and Ron. 3 pairs of eyes stared at Guan Qiong, their eyes gleaming brightly. We found Dumbledore, Ron spoke first, then suddenly realized, oh, no, I mean, we found Nicholas Flamel. He's on the back of Dumbledore's picture. He pointed to the picture in Harry's hand and said excitedly. Neville was bullied by Malfoy just now, and then, Hermione explained to Guan Qiong what had happened while he was gone. So, is the thing Snape has been looking for the Philosopher's Stone? Harry asked nervously, pinching the card in his hand. Guan Qiong nodded, confirming their suspicions. Oh, my God, it really is the Philosopher's Stone, Ron groaned. The thought of the stone turning any metal into gold made him want to go up to the 4th floor and claim the stone for himself. No wonder he's so obsessed. The stone can create an elixir of life, maybe even bring Voldemort back to life, Hermione continued to speculate. No, that's the effect of the Resurrection Stone. No, the Resurrection Stone doesn't have that effect. This world can't be resurrected, Guan Qiong thought to herself, but didn't interrupt them. John, I know you still don't believe Snape is a bad guy. Just watch tomorrow's match. He'll definitely take action, and that'll prove everything, Harry said, his face a heroic expression, more like he was going to an execution than a match. Guan Qiong simply nodded. Ron and Hermione were already discussing what they would do if they got their hands on the stone. Ron envisioned making a fortune and enriching his family, while Hermione envisioned deciphering the stone, making the elixir of life universal and granting everyone eternal life. Finally, they asked Guan Qiong. After some thought, he realized he didn't have much in mind for the Philosopher's Stone. I'll probably take a closer look, he said. The Quidditch match arrived as scheduled, with Gryffindor and Hufflepuff playing, and Snape was the referee. No one favored Gryffindor, as they had defeated Snape's Slytherin house in the previous match. Given Snape's temperament, he was sure to trip up Gryffindor. If not for this, why would he apply to referee this time? Remember, in previous Quidditch matches, the referee was always Madame Hooch, the flying professor. But Guan Qiong had a different idea. Looking at Snape, who pursed his lips, Guan Qiong speculated that Snape was refereeing this time, firstly to protect Harry, and secondly to find the person who had plotted against Harry. He suspected it was Quirrell, but without evidence, Dumbledore wouldn't arrest a professor for his speculation. Guan Qiong followed Hermione and Ron to the Quidditch stands. Watching the cheering students from both houses, the rising flags of the Quidditch teams, he had to admit, a strange excitement welled up within him. He wanted to shout and cheer for the players. Although he didn't quite understand Quidditch, he knew it was all right to fight, all right to fly, and all right to shout along. He didn't shout, but he used a lighting spell to create a large, flashing sign that read, "Go Gryffindor, where's the golden snitch?" "Why hasn't it appeared yet?" Ron asked nervously, watching the match unfold. 5 minutes into the match, both seekers hadn't seen the snitch yet, circling overhead, waiting for their chance. Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective, and the world took on a different look. He watched the field as a fine, thin circuit of magic moved at an incredible speed along the edge of the field. If Guan Qiong hadn't turned his head in time, the circuit would have flown out of his sight. There, Guan Qiong pointed to the location of the golden snitch, and simultaneously cast a luminous spell to form an arrow pointing in that direction. "Over there, Harry, over there," Ron shouted to Harry in mid-air the moment he saw the golden flash. Unfortunately, the wind was so strong that Harry didn't hear. But the next second, the golden snitch flew to the center of the field and then, like a firework, soared straight up. Harry and the Hufflepuff seeker saw it and accelerated towards the golden snitch. "Come on, Harry." "Ouch!" Ron suddenly cried out in pain as someone hit him hard on the back of the head from behind. "Weasley, I heard you playing tricks on the sidelines." Malfoy looked at Ron, who was holding his head with his hands, with an annoying smile. Beside him stood his two minions, Goyle and Crabbe. "What do you want? Want to fight?" "I'm not afraid of you," Ron said angrily, his fists clenched tightly. "Haha, are you sure? I just wanted to try out a spell I just learned. I tried it on Longbottom from your Gryffindor yesterday, and it worked." He jumped back crying. Malfoy laughed loudly. Then, he seemed to notice Neville next to him and said apologetically, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you just now, Mr. Longbottom." "I hope you didn't cry." The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and his eyebrows twitched constantly. It was obvious that this was not a sincere apology, but a mockery. Neville clenched his fists like Ron, but he lowered his head, not daring to look at Malfoy. "Don't be too much, Malfoy." Hermione raised her wand angrily and pointed it at Malfoy. Chapter 25 Pure Blood Guan Qiong? "Oh, you want to challenge me to a wizarding duel?" Malfoy sneered, completely disregarding Hermione. He'd heard of her before him, of course. Gryffindors know it all. Everyone said she should be in Ravenclaw. But wizard's strength isn't measured by the number of books read, but by actual combat. The spell he had just learned yesterday was powerful, and he was sure he'd teach that bookish know-it-all a lesson. Just as he was about to draw his wand, he saw Guan Qiong beside Hermione. "Oh, June, I didn't expect you to be here. I heard you didn't like Quidditch, but I wasn't expecting to see you here," Malfoy said cordially. His demeanor had completely shifted, and the smile on his face was genuine. And genuine. Guan Qiong rolled his eyes at Ma Xianlong's pretentiousness. Honestly, he and Malfoy hadn't had much interaction. Malfoy and Harry were always at odds, and Guan Qiong didn't bother to intervene. Malfoy, on the other hand, treated him well and had even considered making friends. When he clearly refused, Malfoy didn't retaliate, but instead maintained a respectful distance, continuing his love-hate relationship with Harry. The reason for Malfoy's actions was this: "John, honestly, I think you should consider my advice and stay away from these half-bloods." Malfoy frowned at Hermione and Ron, fanning his nose with his hand, as if they had some unpleasant odor. "As a pure-blood, you should join us. Only we can truly understand you." Malfoy extended his right hand, a friendly smile on his face, in an invitation. This was his second invitation to Jean, the last time being at the beginning of the term. "John is a pure-blood," Ron exclaimed, looking at Jean. Before Jean could reply, Malfoy spoke first. "Of course, Weasley, use that rusty brain of yours from spending so much time with muggles and think about it carefully," Malfoy said to Ron, looking at him as if he were a fool. "Only pure-blood wizards can possess such powerful talents. This is something you will never understand. You realize have been with muggles for too long and have forgotten the glory of us pure-bloods," Guan Qiong sighed. "Indeed, only pure-blood wizards can possess powerful talents, and he possesses powerful talents, so he is a pure-blood wizard. Even if his bloodline comes from the East, he is still an Eastern pure-blood." This is Malfoy's logic, and he believes it so firmly. That's why he has invited Guan Qiong so many times, and his attitude is completely different from everyone else's. Hermione turned to look at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong had never told her these things. Guan Qiong shook his head, not in denial, but because he wasn't sure. After all, he grew up in an orphanage and had never known his parents. But it didn't make any sense. Pure-blood wizards are not celestial dragons. In this world, Strength is the key. Didn't you see that even a half-blood like Voldemort had a horde of pure blood minions following him, almost shouting about unifying Britain for eternity? Elsewhere, Ron and Malfoy were arguing fiercely, both wands drawn, ready to engage in a wizarding duel. No one paid any attention to Harry, still chasing the snitch through the air, nor did anyone watch Snape to see if he'd made a move on Harry. Hermione also drew her wand, ready to help Ron. Malfoy was flanked by Goyle and Crabbe. On Ron's side, Neville drew his wand but faltered, unable to utter a single spell. Just then, Gwen waved her wand, and a levitation charm was activated. Malfoy suddenly felt his body lose its footing, as if he'd fallen into water. His limbs gave way, leaving him unable to control himself, let alone aim a spell at Ron. Goyle and Crabbe did the same thing, and all three of them floated, their bodies thrashing in midair. Gwen stepped in front of Malfoy and cast a levitation charm to ride him. To be honest, he didn't have much ill will towards Malfoy. After all, Malfoy still respected him quite a bit. As for his pranks, they weren't a big deal. They were only targeting other people, not Guan Qiong. Besides, Malfoy was only 12 years old, while Guan Qiong's soul was already that of a 28-year-old. Naturally, he wouldn't bother with a child. But since Malfoy had come today, he might as well give him a lesson. He'd stop him from showing off and becoming an eyesore. Perhaps you've forgotten something. Guan Qiong's wand emitted a burst of light, forming words in front of Malfoy. On Halloween, your prank nearly went terribly wrong. I'm sure Professor Snape has already spoken to you. Malfoy's already pale face paled even more, his eyes filled with fear. I was targeting Harry Potter, Malfoy argued. I don't care who you were targeting. I just know your pranks ended up affecting me, Guan Qiong added, recalling the scene. I was so sick from the smell of the trolls that I couldn't eat for a week. Guan Qiong waved her wand, turning Malfoy upside down, the subtitles spinning in unison. I had almost forgotten about you, but I didn't expect you to find me. Let me show you how I dealt with trolls back then, Malfoy cried out in shock. He stared at the upside-down world, remembering what Snape had told him about the troll's death. His head felt like it was filled with white chocolate. Now, his head was upside down, the ground below him, and Guan Qiong was controlling his body, lifting it higher and higher. I'm sorry, June, I won't do it again, Malfoy screamed in apology, tears and snot streaming down his golden hair. Guan Qiong simply waved her hand, and the levitation spell on Malfoy disappeared. To the gasps of Hermione, Ron, and the others, Malfoy fell straight down. The expected accident didn't happen. The ground suddenly softened, like a trampoline, and Guan Qiong adjusted Malfoy's body in midair, causing him to hit the ground on his back. Ah! Malfoy climbed up, letting out a long gasp as if the dead had come back to life. He looked at Guan Qiong with fear in his eyes. Quick! Go! He screamed. Goyle and Crabbe, who had been put down, lifted him up and ran away. This lesson will probably leave a deep impression on him for a while. Guan Qiong put away his wand easily, thinking to himself. After all, he is not a devil, and Malfoy is not someone who deserves to die, so he just wants to scare him so that he will remember it when he plays pranks in the future. Of course, it is impossible to say that this will scare Malfoy so that he will never dare to play pranks again. He is only afraid of Guan Qiong, not Harry and Ron. As for Hermione, seeing the relationship between Hermione and Guan Qiong, Malfoy probably dare not play a prank on Hermione. After all, if the prank affects Guan Qiong, he does not want to go through the troll death simulation experience again. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.